Hello and welcome to the Library of Chaos podcast. I'm Wozni.
And I'm Obrium.
And I'm Goz. Thank you for having me on the podcast again, guys.
Wait a second. Anyway,
What was
a quick shout out to my friend Jim, who has written a new intro jingle. I'll put a link in the description to his stuff if anyone wants to check him out. So, today we are looking at Farseer by William King. I don't know why we're reviewing this book. I think I initially, for some reason, I had it jotted down that this was one of the first books that had a limited edition release, but as far as I can tell now, I can't find any record of that. So there's nothing really notable about this book in terms of prominence from Games Workshop or anything that's come off the back of it, but we read it before I realised this, so here we are.
I'll tell you why I'm reviewing this book. It's because you said, this is a book we're doing on the podcast, and it's about Eldar. You get to learn about Eldar for the first time. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Sounds promising.
We did.
We did get to learn about Eldar for the first time.
I do have a few interesting facts about this book. I mentioned at the end of our last episode that it would be nice to review a standalone book that isn't in a trilogy. It turns out this was supposed to be a trilogy, but it didn't take off. So we just have the one book from the William King's Farseer trilogy. So another series that William King mysteriously disappeared from.
So this is a failed trilogy book?
Yes.
Interesting.
Why couldn't this happen to Last Chances?
Because he hadn't finished telling the edgiest story alive.
Well, yeah. Also, there's something else fun about this book. It's one of the only 3 books that has been republished as a non-canon book.
They removed all of the 40k references?
No. At some point, Games Workshop went, we're going to have a brand and republish some books under it to indicate that this book is not canon. It's called the Heretic Tomes brand.
Wow, so actually I didn't learn anything about Eldar. I learned stuff about what Eldar used to be, and they just scrubbed it from the canon at some point?
We'll get to that, yes. But yeah, this is one of 3 books that is officially not canon, according to Games Workshop and Black Library.
All the books that they have in the Black Library, and there's only 3, and this is one of them.
Well, I think they kind of stopped. It's one of the only 3 they actually got around to declaring non-canon. There are others which I think we'd probably consider non-canon, but they never got around to marking them. What did
this book do to the Black Library people?
Well, do either of you know what any of the other 2 books that got marked as Heretics Tomes are?
Ian Watson's Space Marine.
Yep.
The Necromonicon?
I think the other one is
something like Call of Chaos.
Another Ian Watson, I think.
It's not an Ian Watson. It's not an Ian Watson. I think it's called Call of Chaos by Brian something or other. I thought I had this in my notes, but I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, so ill-prepared. It's only been 3 months.
So what did those books do?
Well, we can get into that another time.
I really hope we'll get a chance to talk about Ian Watson's Space Marine in the future, because Ian Watson's Space Marine, I have a first edition copy, and that book is special to my heart.
I have heard a lot about that book. I'm looking forward to reading it at some point.
It's infamous. But what I want to... Okay. What I want to bring up here is that the interesting thing, the reason why I wanted us to cover this, is it's part of what... Welcome to the first sub-series of the Library of Chaos podcast. This is The Forgotten and the Purged, Black Library books that have been cast into the abyss. Nobody cares about them. Nobody remembers them. They were published and they've left no legacy, left no trail. The Gaunt's Ghost books have left a trail. They're considerably important, as are the Eisenhorn books. Even Annihilation, even the Last Chances have left their mark.
Yeah, they had
You love the Eisenhorn books, guys.
The Last Chances.
My story straight.
The Last Chances books did have a model range, and we had mostly forgotten them until Gav Thorpe wrote a 4th book for some reason. Yeah. Which really feels weird to know that there is a 4th book, given how that trilogy definitely didn't feel like it needed a 4th. But anyway,
just you wait. Just you fucking wait.
Okay. You've read it now, haven't you? Yeah.
I read it straight after I read the first 3. I went straight from Annihilation Squad to Armageddon Saint, and Oh, that was a fucking trip.
Well, one day. I guess the Space Wolf books also, they're purely by virtue of the fact that they are about Ragnar. They haven't really been left in the past, right? Otherwise, they kind of feel like they have. Like a lot of it doesn't feel like a modern 40k book, like the Space Wolf series,
No.
also by King.
Well, when we read them, I think it kind of emphasized how much of a good introduction those books were. So it's not. I feel like they couldn't really necessarily be left in the past, even if they differ a bit in sort of style and structure from the other books, because they're still really good as an introduction to the world.
So I would say that about much like the Space Wolf books, there are some things which don't fit anymore. But the things that don't fit anymore in this book might be a bit more egregious. But I will say that this is a really good introduction to Eldar, in my opinion. Like,
Really?
yeah, I think that the Eldar in this book, never mind like what they do and how egregious some of the lore that like doesn't fit anymore is, but I think that the way they've been personified is probably better than any book I've seen Eldar in. Outside of this.
I don't agree. At all.
Okay.
In the slightest.
Huh. Okay.
I mean, my experience of Eldar outside of this book leads me to believe that the Eldar are, if anything, less enigmatic in this book than usual.
I am now going to make my first hot take. Gav Thorpe writes better Eldar than Bill King.
I haven't seen a lot of Eldar from Gav Thorpe. I know he did the Path of the Eldar trilogy.
Series, yeah.
I've not read that yet. All I know is it's generally loathed, even by Eldar players. And normally,
but
people who like a faction...
They're still more accurate to Eldar than...
Oh, it's not accurate. It's not accurate.
High Elf ripoffs.
Oh, it's not accurate. I mean, it's not accurate, but mainly... I feel like the stuff that's not accurate is mainly because of, like, the canon changing, right? I don't know.
That's why
you know what?
Because these are just High Elves with Eldar slept on them.
You know what? I'll get into that more of, like, some specific examples later on. And we can compare
I can get into specific examples of how these are literally his High Elves from the Gotrek and Felix books.
Interesting. So I've not read his Gotrek and Felix books, so that will be interesting.
Well, that's a problem. I've read Gotrek and Felix books, and the many problems with this book, you can see them quite clearly if you're able to read the Gotrek and Felix books.
Well, are Gotrek and Felix not supposed to be quite well-renowned books?
Yeah,
they are very renowned books, but they are Warhammer Fantasy. What fits in Warhammer Fantasy doesn't necessarily fit in 40k.
Okay. Fair enough. Do we have any...
So are you saying that everything I learned about Eldar from this book, all of their backstory, everything that happened to them, all of that is just bullshit because they wiped it entirely from the canon?
Not entirely.
They didn't wipe it entirely, they tweaked it.
There's stuff that's... Yeah. Some of it feels a bit... no longer has a place. Some of it feels like, well, that's technically correct, but it's the way it's treated feels tonally off. It feels really weird to say that without getting into specific examples, but we'll get into it later.
We'll get into specific examples. We've been preempting about this.
Do we have any pre-spoiler stuff anymore before we go into this, or... I've got one more comment.
Well, at some point you wanted to actually give an overview of the plot, right? That was
yes, please.
Spoiler-free.
Sure.
Just one sentence.
What's the premise of this book? Do you want to go for that, Adrian?
I can do. So the story is about our main character, a Janus Dark, who is a rogue trader, and his crew, including a navigator from a house of nobility, and they get contracted by some mysterious elder to go on a chaos-filled adventure across Imperial space. I don't know how much else I can say really without leading into...
That's a pretty solid
I'd say
basic plot synopsis.
I think that I have one more note of something I wanted to say before we go into spoilers. This book is not child-friendly.
Oh no, not at all.
This is probably the least child-friendly book we've done so far.
Okay.
Maybe, you know what, there's the ending of Annihilation Squad, but still, even so...
I would say the ending of Annihilation Squad is probably worse, but then that comes out of nowhere in a way that the rest of the book doesn't really fit with that tone either.
I think some of the specific details this goes into might make it worse. I don't know.
Possibly.
Well, here's the thing. We'll get into this, because I have a lot to say about this particular part of the plot.
Okay.
I think the difference between... Yeah, it's hard to discuss really the difference between the two and why I don't necessarily agree with you, Wozni, without going into specifics, I'd say, of what it actually talks about.
Fair enough.
Maybe I'm forgetting bits that you're going to point at, and I'm going to be like, oh shit, you're right.
Fair enough. Are we happy to go into spoilers then?
I
Let's
guess
get
so.
this show on the road. I've been
Cue the
waiting
spoiler
for
music.
this.
Farseer, before we start, I have an opening question. Is it Janus or
Okay.
Janus?
It's Two-Face
That's a
McDuckman.
great question.
I just think
See-
having your character called Janus is a bold move.
Hey, it's no worse than the other character whose name is a Phoenix, which rhymes with penis.
Ooh,
Every fucking
that's
name
a
in this
good
thing
one.
is kind of fella.
That's a.
Just you
Hmm.
wait. So, can I start now?
So hold on, before you start, like let's iron this out because this is our main character we're talking about here. Why? Who do you think it's named after, and why would you argue to pronounce it Janus as opposed to Janus?
Mainly for comedic effect.
His
Okay,
name
so
is the most blatant spoiler of how this book is going to end, because this book is a giant pile of shit.
Okay.
This
Well-
book is the worst Black Library book I have read so far. It's Annihilation Squad is a train wreck. It's an entertaining train wreck. This is the most boring, rote, cookie cutter, cliche ridden. This is the most generic genre example of a pulp novel. This book is so cookie cutter, it could have been made at the Arnott's factory.
So
The Griffin's factory? What kind of cookies do they make in
Jimbus,
your part of the world?
Jimbus, I have a question. For you. I can agree that this is a bit generic. It's a bit cookie cutter. It's very pulpy. But I would also say the same about like some of the Space Wolf books, and you loved them. They're also just very like
that's
generic.
the thing that
pulp
I want to
fiction.
ask. The Space Wolf books are also generic, but they are not insultingly generic. They are not so generic that they could have been. It feels like Bill King assembled it in an afternoon from bits and pieces of the plot tropes of pulp fiction.
Okay, there are an awful lot of tropes. I actually made a note of every time I came across something that was a trope, I wrote it down.
There is
and
nothing
was an awful
intelligent
lot.
in this book.
There's an
I don't
awful
know.
lot of tropes, but I wouldn't necessarily. So my question, I guess, is how much of this story, from a 40k perspective, was not new at the time? Because obviously, with the Space Wolf books, they were written very, very early on. They were introductions to the entire universe for people. Is this not the same? I thought this covered like new ground for a lot of Eldar stuff.
I don't think so.
Absolutely not. Everything
think
it's
so.
covering has been covered in dozens of codices before it. Well, not dozens. Like
There's been like two,
Three,
which is all of them.
All
But
of the
basically,
codices.
there is nothing new plot-wise.
There
There is
is-
nothing new character-wise. There is nothing new to this book at all. This
I
book is-
suspect that this book has a few. I wanted to add this to the canon, and it didn't make it. Things similar to wait,
King.
similar to Space Wolf with its like adamantium and its disc grenades. Like you have the Dreamstones. I imagine the Dreamstones are like a king thing that didn't make it.
To me,
you know what the Dreamstones are? They got their Spirit Stones.
But
yeah,
there's
that's
also
kind of what I
Waystones,
thought they
but
were.
there's-
But they
there's-
also act as if they're not Spirit Stones, which is what was confusing as hell to me.
Yeah, because they had
Yeah,
Dreamstones
which
and they had
is-
Waystones. Well, let's cover that
Which-
when we get to it. But I guess it's a king interpretation of Spirit Stones, right?
Yeah, Observation, which didn't stick because Gav
Yeah.
Thorpe fucking carved that one out for himself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? I solidly disagree with you, but we'll get into this sort of stuff later, and maybe you'll have changed my mind by the end of it as you start talking about the different tropes. All right. So we start out of this one in a bar, the Palace of Pleasure.
What's the most generic way we can start the most generic book? Our fucking MC getting drunk in a bar. This
Okay.
it's the most generic start you can imagine.
All right.
With a character who has got the most generic name you can imagine. Two-Face McDuckman. He's
Also,
our protagonist. Lol.
Oh, also, guess
Wait,
who
when you
else
say
is on the
Two-Face,
thing?
is this Janus Two-Face? Is this like
Janus,
a
the
mythological...
two-faced god. Yeah.
Oh,
the two-faced
okay.
god from
There's a
Egypt.
mythology reference I didn't recognize.
Or Roman, I can't remember
Oh,
which
and
one.
it's
Whatever.
also the most blatant spoiler of what the fuck's going to happen. It's like,
Well,
I worked out the twist in the story halfway through. I'm like, that's what Bill King's doing.
I got there a little earlier than that. A little later than that, but
I
yeah.
was never caught by surprise by this book.
So I thought, when the bar was called the Palace of Pleasure, I thought this might just be an awkward use of the canon, Just like there's been like really awkward uses of the canon in the Space Wolf books and in the Gav Thorpe books. You remember Korn's twins?
Yes, yeah, and the mountain that was named after like Slanesh or something like that. There was one in the
Korn's
Wolf
twins, I think. Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah, on Fenris.
Yeah, on Fenris.
Yeah. If you're not aware, Abraham, the Palace of Pleasure is like a place in Slanesh's domain.
Well, everyone after this, like they refer to people as like the prince or the queen of pleasure, like all the time as well. So I mean, it was a bit weird to see that here. I didn't know that, as you said. Like that's actually really interesting that it is literally just called that.
Yes.
But yeah, it wouldn't have surprised me in the slightest.
Yeah. So I
was so on the nose.
I thought this was an awkward use of the canon. It's like, nope, I was wrong. This is just actually a Slanesh thing.
You gave Bill King way too much credit.
It's not so much that I gave him credit, it's that I thought he'd done something weird, and it's like, oh, actually, that is just a very basic... Maybe I feel like I didn't give him enough credit. I thought he was doing something dumb, when it was actually just something basic.
It was just something basic, yeah. Very basic.
Yeah.
Basic is a term for dumb, right?
No. Basic is uninspired, unimaginative, it's not necessarily wrong. You know?
Which is a perfect description of this book.
Well, we definitely got things which are wrong. I will say this book, the Space Wolf books, we sort of talked about that they've read really easily. I feel like this was a really easy read as well. Like you might say it was boring, but it wasn't a slog to read it like a Gav Thorpe book.
No, this was it was very easy to read. As you said,
like it flew right past. It was a very short.
Yeah, I sped through this book really rapidly. Sorry,
this book was the reading equivalent of 2-minute noodles. In my mouth and out my shitter in a single go, leaving nothing behind.
I mean, you say it left nothing behind, but apparently it left a really, really bad taste because you haven't stopped talking about that.
The dialogue.
Well, it did leave a really bad taste. It left a bad taste because I was expecting more and I got nothing.
Oh. Well, I'll say this. Even though I say it read easily, I think the dialogue was a lot more clunky than in Space Wolf 1. I could have brought it up before, but I wanted to bring it now because I have some examples of some really awful clunky dialogue. I know you. You're Weasel, you Gretchen-spawned bastard informer. It reads like something out of Garth Marenghi's Dark Place.
He's I'll say at the beginning there, he tries way too hard to push as much backstory so that we know what the hell's going on into like the dialogue very rapidly. Yeah. But then at the same time, he has time to make really stupid jokes about double negatives and like. So there's a one section of this conversation where Weasel says something like,
for anyone who's uninitiated, what conversation is this? You're suddenly.
It's literally the first conversation we see.
Oh yeah, no. The very first thing that happens is this Weasel guy comes up and talks to him in a bar. And he goes, "You're a Weasel, you Gretchen-spawned bastard informer." Tells us.
Oh, can we point out? Can we point out how this is absolutely another terrible trope that turns up in books and movies and TV shows and literally everywhere, where the bastard informant Gretchen scum character also looks like a weasel and is named Weasel. Like he's literally just like he's a rat in human clothing, and that is literally what he is. Like it's so stupid.
Yes. I have another
it's such a tired trope.
I have another line of clunky dialogue, which was, "I felt like hitting him." It reads like that. Read like it was out of fan fiction. I was like, "What is going on?"
Okay, so that double negative section, I have to read this like 4 lines because it was so dumb. So Dark points out after Weasel makes double negative, he says, "That's a double negative, Weasel." "What do you mean by that, Captain?" "Never mind. I doubt grammar was ever your strong suit. My grammar was as strong as an ox." It's like, why? Why would you make this joke in the middle of this conversation?
Because it sounded better in his head.
The very start of this book felt so clunky, but it did sort of settle in and start feeling a bit more natural after.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like he was trying too hard at the beginning there because he wanted to force a bunch of stuff that happened off screen into our heads immediately so that we knew what was going on. And I don't know whether it worked necessarily.
I think here's
the thing,
succeeded at that
before.
But it's
more talented authors make it work.
Well, you know what?
King is not Dan Abnett.
Well, you know what? He doesn't make it work. It doesn't feel good, but he does get the job done because we do very quickly get an idea of what's his deal, who is he, what kind of person is he. You know, from his convo and his thoughts, we know he's a disgraced captain. He had a job gone bad near the Eye of Terror at planet Typhon. He's in debt. He's got a relationship with a bar owner. He's like a real Han Solo type.
Oh yeah, and just so that we are clear, just so that we are clear exactly what our character looks like, Weasel then says, "Strangers were looking for you. They described you perfectly. Cue description of Janice Dark, who's our main character."
No, I missed
It was-
that.
Yeah.
It was perfect.
So,
It was
all of this info, and the fact that he's haunted by demon voices, is like fed to us over the course of one conversation and his internal monologue in one like bar scene. All of this is
Oh,
like
yeah.
shotgunned into your brain at the start.
it's way too compressed. Yeah.
We also
So, quick question
go on.
about Typhon. What is
Yes.
why is Typhon significant here? How is this? How does this fit in?
So Typhon, which is a very interesting name given it's also we've got Callas Typhon, or aka Typhus, is a weird sort of thing to name a character. It feels a bit tonally off. It's like naming a planet Khan. It's a planet he had some sort of disastrous expedition to, which gets referenced a lot, but we don't really find out that much about it. If you search it up, you find no reference to it other than like a Dawn of War 2 planet, Typhon Primaris. So yeah, it's one of these things, as you said, Jimba's forgotten and purged ancient book. We also have.
There's another thing that we need to point out that's been forgotten.
Is it
and purged.
Medusa?
Yes, he got it so fucking wrong. It's amazing.
Well,
He
wrong
heard
or
there was
different?
a Medusa, a planet. Well,
Because
there's only
it's
one Medusa close to the Eye of Terror, and this is not it.
Well, this is because I made a comparison here to Last Chances with Deliverance, right? Where similar to Last Chances, we have something which is named after a thing that we know exists now, but it doesn't feel like it at all. Although one of the people described as looking for him does sound a bit like an Iron Hand. This tall man, massive, all garbed in grey. He's got a silver prosthetic, a monster bigger than Dugan by half, and maybe there was something wrong with his mouth. Right? Like, that could be an Iron Hand, but I don't know. One thing I've noticed with King's stuff, he does a lot of sort of product placement without naming the product name, which I'll come back to later. It's not like we don't, yeah. Does that make sense?
So very much the opposite of a lot of books where
A lot of
they don't
modern
actually
books, at
describe much, they'll just state the name of the thing.
Yeah. So it might be describing an Iron Hand, but it's still like, this doesn't feel like you'd expect it. Like, because in the current lore, or you know what, I'm not entirely sure how it sits after the Gathering Storm, but before that, Medusa is like where Ferrus Manus rocked up and turned it into the Iron Hands world. It's a desolate world filled with like loads of what's the word for it? Artifacts. What's the word for like old artifacts? Archaeotech. Ancient archaeotech. It's got like different clans at different areas which are at war with each other and constantly fighting to breed strong and hardy men, and this is where they pull Space Marines from. Very different from this free port filled with corruption. I've got a quote here. Why was Medusa so corrupt? Janus wondered. It was a place where a man could get away with murder by slipping the Arbeitertas, where the nobility was said to be riddled by chaos worship, and the governor spent all day and all night in his harem smoking a hookah full of devilroot to give him potency for the coming pleasures. Justina hints a man could gain entrance to all manner of exotic and prescribed cults with ease. Doesn't really feel like Medusa.
So I didn't even like twig to the fact that this was supposed to be the Medusa, as in like
Maybe it
to have
wasn't.
the whole of the Iron Hands. I was like, what?
It's ambiguous, I guess, right? It's like Deliverance in the Last Chances books, where you've got like literal spear-chucking natives, whereas now Deliverance is like the moon that the Raven Guards pull from.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know what you guys were talking about for the last like 10 minutes because I didn't even think about that because it didn't seem like a Space Marine home world in the slightest.
No. But yeah, we've got some of these like dated references that don't fit anymore, really, or are tonally
so would
off.
Would there have been a reason why he decided he was going to set this on Medusa?
I don't know how fleshed out Medusa would have been at the time. It might be like Deliverance.
It was actually very fleshed out. It was mentioned in multiple codices.
Okay, that's just fucking stupid. Then okay. So then, two Eldar walk into a bar.
Hold on. Another quick question.
Oh.
Sorry, as a little bit of an aside. So what is ceramite in this world in terms of... So I know of ceramite as Space Marine armor metal, right? So why are all the bar tables made of ceramite in this bar? Is it just 40k steel or something? Like,
well, you've got plasteel,
because...
haven't you? And plascrete.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling what you're about to say is that because William King's using things wrong.
Yes.
Great. I was just like, this is quite a wondrous material, because not only do you make Space Marine armor out of it, but you also just make tables out of it. I guess it's that prevalent
Very
in the universe.
versatile.
Yeah.
So 2 Eldar walk into a bar.
Yep.
They have an interesting conversation. They sort of tell him exactly as much as they need to tell him.
We don't. So we don't immediately know that they're Eldar, but one is called the One Who Sees, and all they do is discuss each other, and they give way too much information about each other as far as like my experience with Eldar is. One of them shouts to the other one and says something like, "She's way too far down the path of the warrior," whatever that meant. And at this, I mean, I don't know much about the Eldar, but all this terminology sounded very much like Eldar stuff, and knowing to expect Eldar from you guys before I read the story, it was pretty obvious who these were.
Yeah, I mean, the story is called Farseer, so, like, you know.
There is that as well.
Is this a good point to, like, give a very brief primer on the idea of the warrior paths of the Eldar Jimbus? Like,
why? It doesn't come up in the book whatsoever.
Yeah, it's good. It's educational for Obrium.
That is kind of a good point.
That's fair. But I guess, like, very brief.
Education for Obrium. We'll give Obrium the education when we talk about the Path of the Warrior in the Gav Fort book.
Nah, fuck that.
A far better job of selling it.
Well, you know, I'll give a basic idea. The basic idea is Eldar pick a sort of path and they go into that path and sort of follow the discipline of that path. And to be honest, my own knowledge is a bit hazy beyond that. But yeah, they have like very strict disciplined lives following whatever path that they are following.
I see. So they're kind of in self-enforced castes. They kind of put themselves into that section.
Yeah, it's like a very big part of Eldar culture, the Craft World Eldar culture.
Okay.
Then
we get introduced to Dreamstones, don't we? Here.
Yes, yeah. So these Eldar, I want to say they talked a lot with each other, but it kind of feels like they very much, a lot of what they say is like what they want him to hear. Was the impression I got. They do feel they are, even though it feels like they're loose with some information. I do get the impression of them being economical of information, and what they tell them is what they know is like everything that they're saying is coloured by the fact that they know what's going to happen with him, and they know basically they know how to interact with him before even setting foot in the bar.
This kind of really annoyed me, the way that the Eldar talks, because it felt like at that point, like any plot involving the Eldar was just going to be kind of a joke, because the Eldar, I don't know, he was just obsessed with saying things like, "This will happen. I have seen it. It always has to happen this way. It would, and it always will." And he just kept repeating those lines. Like every time he said something, he was just like, "And this will be."
That's because Bill King read the plot entry for what a Farseer is and based the entire personality on that.
Okay, I'll give you that.
Because the characters in this are fucking two-dimensional. This Farseer he is a Farseer. That is his character. He has no other character beyond that.
But you know what? I'll say this. I prefer that to most Eldar renditions, which are he is a dumbass who is trying to appear smart. Like
there's something entertaining about Eldar being dumbasses being hoisted in their own petard.
I don't know. I feel like this is I don't know. I'll get into it more later on as well, but I feel like the way he speaks feels more, you know, if William King looked at the plot, like a description of what an Eldar is and went, "Oh, I'm going to base the personality of it on that," then he did a much better job of it than most other authors I've seen. Even if he, like, you know, there's not that much going on, but he's not just, most Eldar generally fall into so many tropes around future seeing, and I feel like he kind of avoids it with this, or he like, lampshades it a lot in some of the later discussions.
He definitely lampshades it, but I don't feel like that makes it better, in my opinion. In fact, it makes it more annoying, because it feels like it almost undermines the plot when you have an Eldar coming into the bar in the first scene and being like, "I know what the plot is. Let's go. We have a plot to do."
I don't mean like that, because here he's like, "Look, you either do this or things go really bad." So hey, but yeah.
I mean, I will say these are far more characters than almost any Eldar I came across in the Horus Heresy.
Oh yeah,
like these are actual characters. I know Jimbo says they're two-dimensional, but they have
Horus Heresy.
But they have two dimensions, which is more than the Horus Heresy Eldar.
I mean, what have we seen for Eldar so far? In what we've read outside, in what we've reviewed, we've had like Ghostmaker, where there's the Eldar. Those were really two-dimensional Eldar at the end of Ghostmaker, right?
Yeah,
they were just like, they were just
Well, it didn't help that we didn't really know much about their character at all. Like they were kind of just introduced as famous people, and we were just supposed to assume that they were famous people in the world.
Kinda. Well, they were like big deal Eldar, but nobody knew who they were because they're Eldar. Kind of. That's how it treats them.
That does happen a lot in this as well.
We had like Eldar prophecy stuff going on in the Space Wolf books, which was also characterized kind of poorly compared to this, I thought. And I think in Last Chances, we had like some Dark Eldar show up who were fine. They were generic Dark Eldar raiders, fine, whatever. So this is, as far as early Black Library goes, we've not really had much Eldar. And, I feel like they played a part of a Farseer from the Eldar fairly well, character-wise. I don't know, it's how I'd expect one to behave, which is like the opposite of what I think almost every time I see an Eldar in a Black Library book. Even if it's generic and boring and like, oh, well, of course he's going to behave like this. Why are all the other ones so poorly written?
Well,
and he is, and I think he is literally one of Bill King's high elves from the Gotrek and Felix.
So,
with
tell me about that.
High elf cut off and Eldar slapped on. Well,
because I've not read them.
Actually, here's the thing: I can't tell you because you haven't read it. If you, the Eldar in this are just the high elves from his. Fantasy
is that a problem though? In what way is that a problem?
Well,
in a
there's
vacuum,
nothing Eldar about these,
isn't there? Because they
this is generic as fuck.
What's missing that would make them better, in your opinion?
Well, to point out the fact that they're not elves, they're aliens. They're an alien species with a completely different way of looking at the universe. Many times in the canon it's pointed out that they might look human, but they are not. Their thought process is alien.
It says that.
Well,
not alien. There's nothing alien about these Eldar.
So yeah, I can agree with that because what
actually says that like multiple times though.
He says
literally
that.
word for word.
But he just says it.
He says it, and
they don't demonstrate it.
Nothing fucking
Yeah, because I feel like what I think is I feel the Farseer has a very different mindset, but it's not like the Eldar mindset is different. It feels like the Farseer mindset is different. So I feel like we see a difference in how he thinks to humans because he's a Farseer, but we don't see a difference because he's an Eldar. Does that make sense?
I was a little bit thrown off in a bit later on when the female elder seems to be flirting with the navigator, and I thought that was a bit strange.
Wait, did that happen?
That felt less Eldar than I was expecting.
We need to get to that later because I missed
another example of this thing being high elves.
Okay.
The story.
I mean, elves are fantasy elves.
Change. It's very this story. You could have taken Eldar, replaced it with elves. Made Two-Face McDarkman a man of the Empire, had it as a sailing ship, and it would have lost nothing.
Huh.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I don't know as much about Warhammer as I do 40k now.
The story is, because I've read his Warhammer Fantasy stories, the fact that this is so generic, it feels like a generic fantasy story with 40k slapped on it as paint.
Okay, so I will say this. From what I know of fantasy, that sounds entirely correct. I don't necessarily think it's a worse story for that, but it does kind of, it's not a good look for William King anyway. So yeah, that's a good observation.
Well, this book is this is the early period of Black Library when they need books and they're going to let you write whatever the fuck you want and shit it out.
Well, except that they're not, because they didn't let him make the second book in this trilogy.
Supposedly there was something so wrong with this one. They didn't finish the trilogy.
Here's a fascinating thing. Think about it. This book didn't sell while 13th Legion sold.
Oh my! I honestly, you know what? A lot of what you're saying about what's wrong with this book, I can agree with, but I still don't think it makes it a worse book than the Last Chances books. And I do think that
I got far more out of the Last Chances books than I did out of this one.
Well, that's because you enjoyed laughing at them, and also you're fascinated in the whole Nazi exploitation thing, which I think.
But there's also something in general absolutely fascinating about the Last Chances. Like we get all the way to the end of the story, and it jumps the shark so hard that it's like watching as we said in the episode, an absolute insane train wreck that is just you can't. It's so fascinating you can't look away.
Anyway, but also
I'd argue is just so boring. I mean, okay. What would the next logical plot point be after we've had our Eldar introduced and say, okay, we're going to be commissioning you to take us to the Eye of Terror? If you were, what would the most logical, most obvious next plot point be?
Introduce the enemy?
something
Yes.
bad happens. Something goes wrong.
Yes.
Okay.
And what happens?
Something goes
We
wrong.
introduce the enemy.
Both. Okay.
It is both.
So-
'cause this
so
book is
just-
just so.
So, to get to that then-
plodding, and it's
I
like,
don't know.
okay, this is obviously what has to happen next, so it happens.
Well, so
Okay.
to get to
We've
that
got
then, let's look at how where the enemy is introduced.
Well, before we do that,
So-
very quickly, let's just discuss the Dreamstone thing. Because
Okay.
Dreamstones came up, and basically...
in this, they just seem like
well, initially, they're like, oh, these extremely super rare gems from Eldar, right?
Yeah, so that was what I understood them to be. Except I kind of knew a little bit about Eldar because we talked in the past about stuff, and so my immediate thought was: are these
Spirit
Eldar
stones?
spirit stones with them
Yeah.
actually in? Are they actually Eldar in these gems that they just give away to random people? And I
Yeah.
thought, this seems a little bit strange behavior for the Eldar.
Let's pause on that point and come back to it later.
Yeah, okay.
That's a very good... But I'm glad we brought that up to pause on it. Chapter comes up next. The Harbinger of Slanesh. Can I just say, the chapter titles in this have been very, audacious and in your face. I don't mind that. But
It's almost as bad as Abner in terms of the spoilers, though. Abner uses 3 lines, and all 3 lines are a spoiler.
Can I rattle off
and in
some
this
of
case,
these?
there are spoilers as well.
Can I rattle off these audacious chapter titles?
Yes, go
We
for it.
have number 3 was the Harbinger of Slanesh. Number 5, not necessarily spoilery, but a really grandiose sounding thing. 7 golden Argosies. 6, a little bit of a red herring given everything else so far. A pair of pincers. Later on we have the Perils of the Warp. Concerning demon princes, which made me think of fucking Tolkien. Concerning hobbits.
Obviously. Yes.
We have
Exactly why he did it.
the birth of a god, the pride of sin, the death god speaks, Farseer's doom. It's like, Jesus Christ. I take turn the page on the chapter and you're like, ooh, what's going on here?
I take it back. These are nowhere near as spoilery as Abnett's, but still.
But, well, I feel like they are fairly spoilery, when you're at that point,
Sometimes
shit,
they
this
are,
is what it's
yeah.
about.
It's not so much their spoiler, it's that they're way too obvious, way too on the nose, and way too generic.
But the thing is,
interesting about
they are really obvious. They're really on the nose, but it's pulp. I'm not looking for something I don't know. I don't mind that from this. That would look out of place in an Abnett book. I think it fits this book fine.
Yeah, I feel like he just went, what's the most dramatic thing that I could call this chapter based on what I've written? And then he just went with that. It was literally the first one he thought of.
These are chapter titles
Damn.
with balls, Jimbers.
This book has way too many balls.
They just growing everywhere. It's like a plague. Of balls.
Okay, now we'll get into...
Well, we are introduced to the enemy.
later.
We're introduced to the enemy,
Okay,
right?
so now can I bring up the other interesting thing, the not so interesting thing about this?
Go on.
It feels like this book was written by Bill King while he was in the middle of No Nut November. Because I'm comfortably horny.
Okay, yes. Yes, okay. So we immediately have,
Wait, so
the bar owner. This is the bar owner who is God damn it. The bar owner who is
she's the
the head of the palace. Yeah, it's the Palace of Pleasure, and she's obviously this flirty, sexually charged woman.
Well, half this
and-
book is Slanesh, so it's definitely going to
And
be.
yeah, the chapter name is the
Simply gonna be
Harbinger
the
of
case, is it not?
Slanesh, and you're like, who could
Okay.
this be?
Here's something else we could talk about. The way Slanesh is presented in this book is the most...
You know what?
It's
Slanesh,
simultaneously
I don't know.
generic and...
appropriate.
I mean...
I don't know if we ever actually see
appropriate.
Slanesh
I mean,
in this
there's a
book,
lot
do we?
more interesting ways of presenting Slanesh than the god of porn.
Well, yes,
he or
but-
she is not actually in this book right now. It is not actually in this book, though, are they?
Well, okay,
It's
but
only ever random demons and.
Slanesh. Okay, the Chaos Gods are never very rarely personally present in any book.
It would be hilarious if Slanesh...
But the idea,
so I
Slanesh
say
as
this-
an idea.
I say this because I was actually really worried at the beginning that they had actually just introduced Slanesh through a mirror, and I was like, "What? What is happening?"
So here's what I'm going to say. Normally, all the themes of Slanesh are very implied, right? In most books that deal with Slanesh things, they're heavily implied. Whereas this book doesn't pull any
because-
punches. It's It's rubbing its balls on the window, as it were.
Yes, but that is. I mean, the other thing, by being implied, it can be a lot more horrific. I'm thinking of like the Hellraiser series, which Slaanesh is very heavily based on.
Sure.
A lot of what's in there is implied. If you're just Slaanesh is the god of porn, so we're going to slap fucking naked ladies everywhere in the most crass. It's crass.
I do think that the Emperor's Children character helps that a bit, but yeah.
You know what? God damn it! I was just thinking, wasn't it?
You know, we'll get to it as just the byline of this podcast.
I have to make this comparison now because
soon enough.
I have to make this comparison now because I've literally just been reading it, and so I don't know if you remember the fourth book of the Dresden Files.
No, because those books are a total jumble. Go on.
So the fourth book is where we are first like properly introduced to the Fae and all of the
who are very
weird.
horny.
Oh, absolutely, and it is way worse than this book. I'm just thinking, like, Jimbus is like complaining about how horny this book is and how like it's so crass.
Well, you know what?
In a way, it's horny and crass in a way that's like.
Well, I think the Dresden Files ones are more. It can't actually
show any of this stuff, so it's like, describing, there's naked ladies on the walls, and just like it's the most unsexy. Sexy.
I don't think it's trying to be sexy. I think it's trying to make it feel grotesque, and I think it manages that. We'll get to that later because I've got some quotes written there.
Well, I like
again. We'll get to that.
Yeah, Janice describes the room though, and as Jimbus says, like it's kind of weird and over the top. And then he says something weird like, and the entire scene was underdone by the fact the walls were literally made of flesh. And I was like, what? What are we looking at here?
She immediately becomes really sketchy when the Dreamstones come up.
Oh, she's sketchy through the entire conversation.
Oh, sure.
And, to the point where I was sitting there thinking, so is she just like a straight up cult member or something? And,
yes.
And then it doesn't even leave that as a mystery because the next scene is from her perspective.
We get to, it immediately tells us a lot more plot. Like the amulet is like, that's not a warding charm. It's a link to Slaanesh and it's corrupting him.
Yeah, she
also,
just
I'm the head of this cult here. I'm the head of the local.
Says all of this.
And I'm the head of the local Slaanesh branch. And also, I want the Eldar.
We get the next scene, right? We get the next scene from her perspective. And she literally thinks all of these lines that we need to know for the plot. Even though technically you could leave this all. So this is actually a good point to mention something that a little bit annoyed me about this book is that because we get so much of the plot given to us from other people's perspectives, so other than Janice's, there's almost no mystery to like to more than half this plot because every time there is a mystery,
no mystery period.
Every time there is a mystery, though, that could be interesting, like, for example, is this person a cultist? We then get a scene from their perspective, which immediately tells us all the answers.
Okay.
He doesn't want us to be in suspense. He wants us to be a very chill, easy read. He doesn't want there to be a single moment where we actually have... I am on the edge of my seat reading Farseer.
There were, you know what? I felt like I was a little on the edge of my seat around the end, but we'll get to that. A lot of this, you are right. Like, you kind of know things are going to plan it. The fact that, you mentioned this over him. The Eldar have come in and said, all right, we know what the plot is, let's go. Means that you already know, well, okay, so he's going to get out of this fine, right? Yeah.
It's weird. It's weird, though, right? So it's hard to describe how I thought about this because it is silly to say that just because a character knows what's going to happen, that there isn't a plot, because we don't know what's going to happen, and it is obviously a book, right? But when a character does come in and say, I know what is going to happen, it's annoying, even though it shouldn't make a difference.
I don't mind it too much.
It shouldn't make any difference at all.
You know what? I think maybe I'm just too used to that from Eldar. That Eldar are annoying with that sort of shit. And I just found this one was less annoying with it than most Eldar I've seen.
Well, usually, at least my experience with the Horus Heresy Eldar is that they don't actually.
Oh, well, they're just
anything.
dumbasses.
They literally just say, "I know what's going to happen," and they don't do anything.
And then they try in the worst way.
They're not supposed to do anything. It's Marine Wink.
That's true.
Well, at least this guy was like, "I know what's going to happen, and I'm going to be an active part of the plot that pushes it forward."
Yeah, that's true. So she then gets on she then speed dials her Slaaneshi patron entity in the mirror.
And that's where we get the fantastic scene, which ends in the flesh room, and it's like, what is this mess?
Oh yeah, he's got the flesh room in his demon world. Yeah. That's pretty reasonable. That the Slaanesh
and I was really worried. I was really, really worried that this was actually going to be actually Slaanesh, and I was totally on board with Jim Burson being like, "What the hell is William King writing here?"
So then it really quickly cuts. It does these little like vantage points of characters and then cuts out very quickly. So then we immediately get like.
It's because their only purpose is to get rid of the mystery, as I said. Like, we just need a few lines from them to make sure that we know exactly what the mystery isn't, and then we just carry on with Janice again.
Yeah, and now we have Janice where things go wrong. So, I did want to say, when he was leaving the bar, we have actually got really nice descriptions of the Freeport, because a lot of stuff doesn't really... There's a lot of stuff he described here, and I kind of found there's a little bit of this in the Space Wolf books as well, where he's really sort of selling you on the aesthetic of 40k, talking about these like stony bridges, the gargoyles. He talks about the cone layout of the Hive City and about seeing another one in the distance. And I feel like this is a lot of like, it's sort of setting world building that it's easy to go, well, obviously that's 40k, but I don't think like, I don't think a cone Hive City has come up in any of our books so far that we've looked at.
I don't know if it has. And we even get introduced to like the obvious like class divide between like the nobles and the workers and stuff.
And how that works in a Hive City.
Yeah, and there's one description of like the scene where these nobles are like walking across the bridge, and like one is balancing on the wall of the bridge, and all of the workers downstairs, down like below the bridge, are looking up, almost hoping that he falls. It's just like it was actually it was kind of an interesting like description and like somewhat
kind of an interesting description. It describes this whole book.
I don't know. I liked it. Yeah, I suppose. I like this bit. It's some nice little like. What you said about this is supposed to be a really chill and easy read is entirely true. There's not really any depth to it, but that's the same for the Space Wolf books. Yeah, it's a very straightforward pulpy story. But he still fits in this world building, same as he did in the Space Wolf books. And as he's wandering here, we get some more exposition in his head.
This is where we get the perfect introduction into Janice Dark, Cold Steel Initiate.
We get his rise to fame and fall from grace, right?
Yeah, but I could not read this section without thinking that it almost felt like we were getting a revisit to Cage from the Last Chances books, and I don't know what it was.
Is it something to do with the first-person perspective?
It was the first-person perspective, just partly, probably. It was also partly like this description, the description of his character, the way he acts, the way he talks to people. He was like, especially at the beginning, where he like threatens Weasel with a gun for like no reason at all, and then thinks to himself, "I would actually have shot him." And it's the voices in his head that seem to be trying to turn him into some sort of weird demonic thing. Which there was so much about this character that made me think it was almost like it was almost like Cage, but without so much of the anger. It was like a less angry
two-dimensional Cage. Well, Cage has actually got more of a dimension.
Okay, I disagree.
The third dimension is entirely anger.
I think Cage is one-dimensional, and I think that Cage is... The problem with...
If Cage is one-dimensional, Two-Face McDarkman is 0.5 dimensions.
I disagree. I think he's got more... I think there's more to him. I think he has more self-awareness than Cage. I think he's less stupid. He doesn't... Less of his action is done because the plot demands him to do it. You know, his character isn't an excuse for him to do stupid things, which is like the whole...
He doesn't have a character.
It doesn't... Well, that's fine, okay? But it's like, you know what? That's just true.
That's fine.
It's fine. Almost like...
If your main character doesn't have a character, how is that fine?
Gav Thorpe has this real tendency to just... None of the characters don't drive his books. Stupid edgy events he wants to have happen drive his books, and the characters just sort of mold into whatever they need to do. And in this book,
there are so many things in this book where, like, Janice Dark just does something really edgy, and I was just sitting there thinking,
mainly early on.
Is this just because he likes the scene? Yeah, early on. Yeah, definitely early on. Because this is why I thought I would like the comparison to Cage like was in my head early on. Because there's so many things early on where it's like, did this scene just seem nice to William King? Was he just like, this is a good scene? Okay. I want to get this scene in the book. And Janice Dark does something like edgy again. Like the scene that's coming up with we
know what's coming up in a moment, okay? But still, like I think. The thing with Cage was a character who they literally just like, oh, I'm gonna do this stupid thing because I'm a badass, and it isn't badass, it's just stupid. Whereas here, it's not I'm gonna do a badass thing, it's I'm gonna do a thing and it's presented as stupid, and it's stupid because he's fucking drunk. Right?
He's just he's gaslighting the fact that his main character is doing stupid shit so that he can get these these weird scenes into the plot.
I don't think that's what gaslighting means, but yeah.
Not gaslighting, sorry. Lamp shading. Lamp lighting, whatever you want to call it.
The quota. He can't simply have Two-Face McDarkman and the Eldar get on their ship and go on their merry way.
Oh, sure, there has to be a problem.
We have to have a completely pointless problem to extend the length for this book.
Well, no, we had to introduce all of the characters. We had to have the good guys, we had to have the bad guys, so we knew what the stakes were. And what
we're about to be introduced.
We're about to go on the wacky races.
Yeah,
none of the bad guys on this planet matter.
Yeah, we're about to.
That cult woman, she will leave the story and never be seen again.
Okay, yeah, but that doesn't.
But like none of these bad guys.
Cult, though, right?
Yeah, but none of these bad guys are about to matter. These are secondary mooks who like are irrelevant to the plot. They are just the problem, the hurdle that needs to be crossed.
The problem is nothing from this first part. None of the villains in this first part matter at all. The whole thing of them holding up they hold up the progression of the plot.
They exist for dramatic. They exist for dramatic tension, but you don't have the. Well, okay, they do two things. They exist for dramatic tension because we know the Eldar. I was about to say that. Like they exist for that, but the Eldar have already dispelled any dramatic tension by saying we've foreseen that the best thing to happen is we're all going to get on this boat together. So we know we already know that's where. Like, you already know the main character's not immediately going to eat shit and die, but we already know not only that, we know that...
We don't know how, though.
He's not going to eat shit and die, and he's then going to get on the boat, right?
And how was really, really strange in this bit.
There is no... But there's no mystery. There's no mystery to the how, but to, like, what the outcome where the protagonist lives is going to be. Because he's going to get on the boat with the Eldar, right?
Sure,
the other thing that this does is it gives an opportunity to show off what's going on with him.
Yeah, and we get to find out Cage's secret inner power. I mean, Janus Dark's secret inner power. Anyway,
there's another
quick question, just to clarify something. The Harbinger of Slaanesh, which is obviously the demon later on that becomes the main part of the villain.
Yes.
Part of the story. This person that she talks to through the mirror, is that actually the Harbinger of Slaanesh? Because they're described completely differently later on.
I believe it is, but okay, so here's two things. One, I initially thought she was the Harbinger of Slaanesh that the chapter title was referring to. Only later on did it become apparent to me, oh wait, hang on, this demon is not just a Slaaneshi demon, it is functioning as a Harbinger of Slaanesh.
The Slaaneshi demon that sparked the entire...
Yeah, sure, yeah. And then the other thing there, as far as being described different later on, I guess this is something very common with Slaanesh depictions in 40k, is that they're often very fickle and prideful, where they will, like, they're what's the word? Nick Kime would call it choleric. They're very, like, they will, their mood will change. I was
reading Nick Kime right now.
Ah, fuck off. No, God, no. This was an easy chill read. I don't care if it's boring, it was an easy chill read. There's just more than I could take for
something
any.
That challenges me over something that leaves nothing behind.
But they only challenge me in terms of my attention span.
I wish I could be reading more Nick Kime than this.
Oh God, no! Awful take. But
your take is awful.
Anyway, but yeah, you know what I mean. Like Slaanesh things tend to be like, I'm happy, but the second I'm unhappy, I'm gonna fly off the handle and have a tantrum because they're so prideful and they're so like used to getting their way, and being perfect. You know, there's a theme of perfection. So that's kind of what I'm thinking.
But that pretty much describes the Emperor's Children in a nutshell, right there.
Oh yeah, Oh, there's one more thing that this scene where he's monologuing here as this whole thing goes off. There's one more thing that his own discussion about his rise to fame and fall from grace and blah 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 gives us an introduction to the navigator Simon.
Simon the Navigator?
Which is, I was like, in what world is a navigator in this setting called Simon?
I mean, let's
Simon's an old Jewish name. It makes sense, because there's...
Okay, I want to hear where this is going.
I mean, here's the thing. What, the idea that the Navigator Guild with its secrecy and these families, I've seen where they've had... I want to go here.
Have these been related? Have people related these to Jewish people before? Is Bill King comparing them? Oh my God! Okay, you know what?
Are they like what? No. Here's
the thing: the Navigator houses most closely based on Dune.
Yes.
And that's going to come up because Bill King's clearly read Dune, because we're going to meet a character who, when I read it and I met him and I read his description, I was like, fuck you, Bill King. Fuck you.
So Dune.
You just stole a Baron Harkonnen wholesale.
Okay, so Dune's a good point to actually discuss here. I've only read the first Dune book.
Wait, so are you saying the Dune houses then are supposed to be compared
Dune
to like
navigators.
Jewish guilds of some kind? What is going on here?
Yeah,
What do
actually,
you
yeah,
mean?
tell me
Where's
that.
the comparison here?
Is that a thing? Did I miss like an interpreted allegory between like?
The
we gonna have to cut this
navigator
entire section out of the
houses of Dune. Well, navigators of Dune, they're a guild, but they've combined them with the noble houses of Dune. They basically smushed the two together. That's what 40k did. So
Oh yeah, that makes
the
sense.
navigators are simultaneously navigators and noble houses. And if you're writing noble houses who are rich and have a lot of influence, I mean, Simon Belisarius, he's got a bit of Rothschild to him. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. For all
Yes,
you Nazis
you're
who
saying that
listen
you
to
think this is what the author's interpretation is. Just to be clear.
it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? I don't want to pass judgment.
I mean,
on
I
this.
say this because House Belisarius are going to be very important later on when we get to the next Space Wolf book, Wolfblade, which is entirely set around House Belisarius.
I was going to ask about that because I remember navigators showing up and you saying they'll be teed up for something. Okay, you know what?
In fact, it's even mentioned here. House Belisarius' symbol is an eye and two wolves, and that's because House Belisarius. The reason it's so powerful and influential is that it's basically hitched its start to the Space Wolves from like the beginning of the Great Crusade onwards, and
which is what was being
ties make them very powerful.
Because we did have that showcased in what was it called? Grey Wolf, Grey Hunter. Where they had the navigators there at the start discussing with that makes.
I mean, we're also about to find out though that
something
astronomically complicated went on between House Belisarius and the Eldar at some point as well.
Well, yeah. Can I before we go there? Before we go there, I just want to take a second to go back to that Dune comparison. So I've read the first Dune book. I think it talks about navigators, but doesn't show you much about them. I've seen the 1984 David Lynch Dune film. And the navigators there are interesting. I don't know.
Bill King has seen Dune. He's seen the Dune film because we'll get to him.
I want to ask something here. Do you know what the deal is with navigators in Dune? If they actually are like horrific mutants, or if that was just a David Lynch thing? Because I know there was a lot of stuff.
They're definitely they're meant to be horrific mutants, but we never see them.
Okay.
And David Lynch decided that subtlety was for idiots.
Okay, that's fair. I respect that.
David Lynch is very good at subtlety.
David Lynch
does some amazingly subtle work.
David Lynch is very good at throwing a lot of things to the wind to do what feels emotionally. You know what? I refuse to get bogged down in the fucking enigma as David Lynch right now. So okay, you've answered my question. Oh, so do I.
Yeah, but that's probably for another time. It isn't a podcast about Farseer.
Maybe if we do a navigator book at some point.
Can we just comment on the fact that there are literally 5 or 6 pages worth of Janice Dark's prior accomplishments, some of which are actually insane.
Yes.
At one point it says that he's as respected as Space Marines in terms of the Emperor's fist of like conquering planets and stuff like that. Which and from what they describe, that doesn't actually surprise me because some of the stuff he's done is insane.
So I would say the fact that he's done this insane shit is insane, but rogue traders they basically have carte blanche to do whatever the fuck they want, like within reason, I'm gonna say, but like what's within reach for them is very different to anybody else in the galaxy. You get a certificate.
My mind.
You get your certificate that says, "Hey, you're a rogue trader." Off you go, and you go off and do whatever the fuck you want in the name of the Imperium.
So exactly, but as Jimba said, like he literally given a writ to be a rogue trader. He got given a writ by the Emperor himself, and so we haven't actually had any experience with rogue traders at this point.
Yeah, we've had, yeah.
Anyway, like the idea though that this guy who got this writ from the Emperor did all of these ridiculous things that basically rivals like most entire segmenter of like imperial armies, and then ended up where he is right now seems really strange.
Well, the implication here to me is, I'm just going to give a basic interpretation of it I can. He's psychically gifted, which has helped him along the way a lot without him realizing it. And then he got given this charm, this Slaneshi charm, and shit went to hell because he got some thing near the Eye of Terror with a Slaneshi charm on him, and he and that's just kind of
supposedly this one mission though, like, went bad enough that it kind of derailed his entire life somehow. Like,
and his entire it has a lot of
story instead. That would have been a far better story than the story we actually got.
Yeah, it might. I also think that it has some very contrived stuff here. Like it's all there's all this stuff about like, well, I happen to have based almost my entire wealth upon this one planet, where actually it turns out that they don't care about my reputation, they just care about me continuing to bring back money. So actually this meant a total disaster for me. It's like very contrived how this confluence of events.
This is exactly what I'm saying. Like, I can't see how somebody who did all of the things, like, he could just leave this planet, right? Go somewhere halfway across the Imperium, and then be like, look, this is all the things I did. And half the planets would just be like, oh, sure, like, just join the Imperial Army. We'll make you like a general, or we'll make you like a commander of the entire region. Like, and he'd be immediately in a much better position than he is right now. And it just, I don't know, it just seems really strange. And like, as you said, contrived, that he has somehow gone from being, he didn't need to be as big as he was. He didn't need to be the rogue trader that, like, conquered half the segment and destroyed all the orcs, and literally beat like war bosses with his own two hands. It's like, he didn't need to be this character to be where he is right now and to go forward for the plot. It's 1,000 words, like, it's more than 1,000 words. It's like 5 or 6 pages of just endless accomplishments.
And then he gets hit in the back of the head by Fugs with Weasel.
Yes.
And then we go to Simon's vantage point.
We get another massive info dump about what navigators are.
So, I didn't finish my thought about Dune, about navigators. But navigators in 40k these days are portrayed more like the horrific mutant. Like, I think the idea is they start off a bit normal, but then they basically, over time, turn into, like, the mutant locked into the ship, right?
They turn into a fetal manatee that shits lasers.
Yeah, sure, yeah, basically. Third eye lasers, why not? Simon Belisarius.
What, you've seen David Lynch's Dune. The way they showed Navigator there is that it shits lasers out of its anus and its mouth.
Oh, yeah! Only in the extended version.
Extended cut.
The extended cut.
Why wouldn't you really watch the extended cut?
Well, I will tell you why not. Anybody here listening right now, I do not recommend the extended cut of Dune, of David Lynch's Dune.
Anyone listening now, I recommend the extended cut of David Lynch's Dune.
It has a great preamble, and it has that nice little scene with the navigator shooting lasers out of its face and its ass to fold time. And then, other than that, every other thing that the extended edition adds just bogs down and slows down everything in the part of a movie that's already slow and does nothing to add anything good. It's oh my god, it's so awfully paced. It has that. Don't watch the extended David Lynch Dune. Just look up the navigator scene. Oh.
Let's be real. If I could fold time and space, I watched it by shooting lasers out of my ass.
I watched it 2 weeks ago, Jimbus. I watched it 2 weeks ago and I regret it.
I guess wasn't he also regrets watching extended versions of the Lord of the Rings movie?
No, God no, because those add to it. They don't make it horribly paced.
Well, so does the extended version of David Lynch.
No, it makes it so.
It is the same as the
no, it's not.
Please can we stop this conversation right here? Like, this is way too off.
Okay, fine.
We don't need to argue about the benefits of extended versions of Dune and Lord of the Rings.
Simon is the most ordinary navigator I've ever seen in a 40k book. He's just like a regular guy.
Simon.
Yeah, he's just a regular guy called Simon, but with the navigator eye. And we see it like in a fucking navigator pub where he's just playing chess with navigators.
It's not a navigator pub. It's a navigator gentleman's club.
Is it?
Wait, no, actually, not the right term. What's the? What are those like naval clubs that they have? Like
it's
a smoking club. It's like a smoking club.
Lounge?
Yeah, I said gentleman's lounge. That's the one. That's the one I was going for. That makes more sense. That makes so much more sense.
I was wondering if I'd missed something big there.
Well, considering he's there with female friend from another house or something.
Yeah.
But we get to learn about the weird like arranged marriage kind of like genetics program of the navigators' houses. We get to learn about
which also feels kind of like Dune, but yeah,
almost certainly.
And then Eldar show up, and he has a fucking pact with the Eldar from his house's ancient history. I will say this. As weird as it is to see Simon as the most ordinary human navigator in the world, the navigators of King's 40k have like actually got some interesting politics and history going on, and aren't just like a bunch of highly regarded mutants.
So one of the most interesting things about this book to me was the navigators and the families and the weird politics and the fact that they somehow had a pact with the Eldar. And I bet you're going to tell me that none of that is canon anymore.
Well, technically, I suppose it isn't, because this book isn't canon anymore. But it is interesting. I liked it.
But is any of that sort of carried on to other books, stories?
Well, you know what? Don't answer that, Jim. We'll get to the next bit of the Space Wolf soon, and I guess we'll see. Yes, we'll find out then.
A lot.
Don't answer. Don't answer.
About House Belisarius in Wolfblade.
Okay,
which is also Bill King's last Ragnar book. So they'll be fun.
I also want to say the Eldar. Imagine my surprise when some of the Eldar I actually know something about, because I have to admit I'm not like the biggest lore buff on Eldar. They're a little boring to me. But it's House. It's the Craft World Ulfway, and they're talking about fucking Eldrad.
To me, that was kind of like the most. That was just blatant, like, oh yeah, remember Eldrad?
Sure, but it could have just been generic Eldar, which is what it was in the Gaunt's Ghosts.
You say that almost like it's a surprise.
I didn't remember this guy.
You say it's almost a surprise that you know about Craft World Ulthway and the fact that it's like well known. But the way the Eldar talk about it, it's like it's the only Craft World. So it's almost like Craft World. But it's like they say, like they talk because at one point Janus talks about the Dreamstones, and he says the Dreamstones can only be obtained by being literally given to you by a Farseer, and from Craft World Ulthway at that.
Oh yeah,
like it's like the only place that these Dreamstones come from.
So Ulthway, I think Ulthway's got some lore around like they have got. I think they have more of a Farseer theme going on than some of the others. They are more concerned about destiny. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, Jimbus. Whereas you've got some of the other ones are more concerned, like Biel-Tan is like a very warlike craft world. Does that sound right? I'm sure I remember reading something in the Gathering Storm fluff about like Eldrad leading people into a room that was like, hey, this is the prophecy room with loads of weird crystals growing everywhere. And
this is the plot room and where we generate the plot. Turn the crank, please.
Oh, no. A Gathering Storm doesn't have plot. It has fluff. It has setting, I guess. I mean, it's kind of plot. But yeah, they were like campaign splat books, which is why I'm talking about them freely here. But yeah, I think they basically have like there is like a special room in the Ulthway Craft World with weird crystals and shit. I'm pretty sure, so it kind of fits all that still. I don't know how old that is. Jim, am I talking out my ass here? I'm not 100% sure on my Eldar lore.
I haven't actually been listening for the last 5 minutes.
Fuck you. Okay. Anyway, right, well, yeah, I don't know. They've actually tied it into stuff in the setting rather than just making up generic Eldar like Abnett's Ghostmaker did.
Yeah,
fine, whatever.
So there's an interesting scene here where Simon meets the Eldar, and the Eldar do some sort of weird ritual to basically to convince Simon that they are there for the pact that he has between his family and the Eldar.
So here's another interesting thing: these Eldar come to him completely openly. In the modern Imperium, they would have been shot at the door.
Yes, they would.
I was a little bit surprised by how blasé they were just walking around in Imperial world.
Except for the fact that they aren't obviously Eldar because they've got their hoods up or something. And also, I guess they're coming to this guy openly knowing that they have a pact with that house and that house.
Oh, so this is actually a really good time to mention something I remembered from a little bit earlier on, which is that when they first joined Janus in the club, they speak Eldar. And we later find out that Janus knows Eldar, and he doesn't realize immediately that they are Eldar, despite the fact that they are speaking Eldar. And we are told that this is because he was drunk.
Okay. Man, King got a lot of mileage out of making him drunk at the start.
So the crazy thing is that we're told, like, this is so that we understand that Janus Dark knows how to speak every language. Not just some of them, every language, including Eldar. Which he somehow learned.
Okay. So this is a pretty like basic, hey, we've got a deal here. You're gonna do your end of the bargain from our ancient pact. We're gonna give you back one of these 7 golden argosies or whatever.
These are basically like the 7 wish coins. They go to the
Yes.
Navigator house and they say, we wish that this happens. And the Navigators go, give us a coin, done.
Yeah, because they presumably the Belisarius wasn't just big because of this shit with the space world. It's also big because of some sort of deal where the Eldar helped them in the past. So the Eldar can call on some favors. So
this seems really heretical.
Yes,
Which is why it's been retconned.
well, you can have heretical stuff without retconning it.
This was not the bit that surprised me in the slightest.
Yeah, I think it's
It
interesting.
seemed completely ordinary.
Having some weird shit going on behind the scenes, especially with navigators.
Why would House Belisarius need a deal with the Eldar when they're getting the pick of all of these planets the Space Wolves are burning to the ground and just able to loot thousands of worlds worth of riches?
Well,
I mean, that's stuff outside of what I currently know, so I don't know. From my perspective, it seems completely fine that they would, at some point, have had to make a deal with the Eldar. Sure. It seemed quite inside the law.
Also, with like the timeline of as it's sold to you in these King books, like for all I think King talks about the Navigator house as predating the Emperor in this book. I think the Navigators discuss that. In which case,
so no, it's Simon's thoughts. So Simon has a thought. He's thinking at some point, and he says something along the lines of, "It's like something they don't talk about, but something that every Navigator house like kind of is interested in. It doesn't really understand, but like they don't know where they came from. They don't know they don't know how they do what they do. They don't know if they're like some sort of mutant creature of humanity, and they don't know if the Emperor did it or whether they even predate the Emperor, which is something they definitely don't talk about."
Sure. So there is it's plausible that this favor from the Eldar from the distant past could even have happened before they I
hadn't thought about that, but that would be crazy. Like before the Emperor, like as in like
sure
before.
As it's set out here, that could be the case, and it would then that would be narratively cohesive with, and then later on they ended up tied to the Space Wolves, right, Jimbus? It's an explanation.
Here's the thing: the birth of Slaanesh, there's a very, very small gap between the birth of Slaanesh and the actual launching of the Great Crusade.
That's true.
Slaanesh's birth banishes all of the warp storms.
Yeah.
So Crawford Ulthway is maybe a couple of 100 years old by the time the Great Crusade begins.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Not much time.
Yeah. But then, I guess, was that all that perfectly fleshed out at that time when King wrote this?
Of course not, because Games Workshop have gone back and basically gone and it's a Star Wars syndrome. They've gone and put way too much detail in.
Did Slaanesh's birth always wipe out warp storms, or did that just come in later?
No, I
that's
think
something.
It was always a part of it.
Yeah, that's something that seemed so ingrained that I knew that, and I don't think I learned.
Well,
that
it's definitely been ingrained since, but yeah, I don't know. Okay,
so I have an interesting suggestion for you guys here. So I was reading this bit with the Eldar, and they were talking to Simon, right? And they know the secret code. And I really wondered at this point, because I didn't know how feasible it was for the Eldar to have made a deal with the Navigators thing, right? And I really wondered if the Eldar was somehow getting information from the future that Simon had told him in the future to be able to answer, a secret question, kind of secret handshake thing in the past now to make Simon trust him in the first place. Because when he's talking to Janice, he literally suggests, Janice says something like, whose recommendation, who gave you the recommendation for my services? And the Eldar says, someone I trust. And Janice is like, who? And the Eldar says, myself. Which so
me.
It seems like this guy is literally receiving not just visions of the future, but almost information that is usable in a very straightforward way from the future.
You've read into that.
No,
I mean, yeah.
That way
so what I was saying, and I haven't read this into it because I then found out that this is not the case, right? So I was then looking at this interaction with Simon, and I thought, is this what's happening here? But
I think you did read into it too much at the time.
Well, it's not what's happening, is it? No. Obviously, he is there is actually a deal of some kind with these 7 coins. My point being, though, is this something that Farseers, how does this fit in with actual Farseers? Do they actually get information from the future that they could use like that, or is it literally just sort of weird visions of things random?
I'm thinking of. I have the worst Vim image in my head. Oh, you're gonna love this, Jimbus.
Go on, share it.
It's the fucking Rick and Morty episode where Morty sees what's going
I
to
don't
happen.
watch Rick and Morty.
You fucking.
Because I don't give a shit about some wife beaters cartoon series.
Wow. Okay.
Alright, well, it's just making me think of an episode where he can basically see exactly he sees how he's gonna die, so he can, like, make every single action as he decides it, knowing, like, how it's going to affect the long run. So, like, his entire thing starts being, I'm gonna... Like, he, like, says the right words to a judge to make them just let him go free or something. It's just made me think of that. It's just so fucking stupid. I can figure out exactly what is the exact right string of words I can put together to make this work out.
Well, this is kind of my question about the Farseers, was like, how much detail do they get of the future? Because it almost seems like in this case they had enough detail that he basically could basically tell himself that I don't know what I'm saying. Like, it just seemed really strange. Like that they have that much information, and it made me wonder like how far William King was going to take this in terms of like the Eldar just completely fucking with time.
Exactly as far as the plot needed.
Well, yeah. In this case, he didn't need that because in this case he didn't need to take it that far because he just had some weird like deal between the Belisarius house and the Eldar to fall back on anyway.
So then we cut back to Janice, who was about to get tortured to death.
And he's about to be tortured to death by Fat Roge, who is, I shit you
Fat
not...
Rog, not Fat Roge.
Fat Rog.
Roge.
No, his name is Rog.
His name's Roge. You pronounce the J with a J.
Nah. I just want to think of him as Fat Rog. Short for Roger, you see.
You're not your typical mafia name, Fat Roger.
Fat Roger.
Fat Rouge, how was it? ROJ?
ROJ.
I mean, to be fair, could be anything.
To be fair, it does sound like a gangster who is otherwise known as Fat Roger might have like shortened his name and tried to give it a French style to it, just to be a bit more special.
Let's go Fat Rouge.
Fat Rouge. Okay,
who's gonna?
Okay.
Well, this is the one I mentioned earlier was like a red herring title. Which was like a pair of pincers. You're like, oh, is that a Slanesh reference? No, this guy is going to use a pair of pincers to twist things off him to kill him, including this has some very graphic torture that is described, if not shown, although it shows a bit of it, including...
Well, I mean, how it's a book. How would it show it? It is obviously describing the scene.
Sure,
right?
But it can like describe as it happens. But it also has it like him describing what he's going to do.
You know there's a difference, O'Brien, between show and tell in a book. That's what I'm trying to say is show, don't tell.
I do. I'm not entirely sure where Wozny was going with that though, because in this case, it is literally described as it's happening.
Okay. Well, here I'll tell you right now. The torture that is described to Janice that doesn't happen. I have a line written down. The badges are the hardest to get off clean. Sometimes the testicle pops under the pressure.
I completely forgot that bit. No.
Does this answer your question?
Maybe I just scrubbed it from my mind. I probably scrubbed it from my mind.
Well, I'm happy to have revisited your mind with this. We do see him lose a finger.
Yeah, we do see him lose a finger, which just somehow magically is returned after the scene.
And then he unleashes the demon with it. No, it isn't returned after.
Oh, okay, so here's the interesting thing. The way this thing portrays demonic possession is in something you can let the demon...
I don't think he's actually demonically possessed here, though.
Oh, he is? Oh, yeah, this is a demonic possession. But it's... I mean, you say that,
well, it's not a demonic possession in the way that happens to Cage or what happens to any of the characters that I've seen in Horus Heresy. This is just like pure raw psycho power that literally pulls people's entrails out and strangles them with it.
The way this portrays demonic possession is more akin to fantasy books where you have like a compact with the demon and the demon gives you power in exchange for, your soul.
My interpretation of this was Janus is able to resist the demon who is constantly trying to possess him, and he gives in and lets it possess him, but it's not like a complete... The demon can only possess him so much at this point in time, right? It can't use him as a vessel in perpetuity. So he stops resisting, which he's been able to do because he's a psyker, and lets the demon just actually possess him.
I mean, shouldn't that be the end? When you let the demon possess you, you're
Well,
not.
no,
The
this is
demon's
what
not
I'm.
going to come out of you.
Because...
It's not like it's going to.
Well, hold on a
Right,
second.
let me
This is the
plot
problem.
armor,
This is the
because there was
problem
a
with this
plot.
entire scene.
Okay.
No, this is the problem with the entire scene, because I initially thought this too. I was like, is this the same as Cage? Is he being possessed by a demon, and then he's just like, what, going to put it back in the bottle and just move on with his life? Because
And he is.
I don't know. This is the thing. I don't think this is actually demon possession at all. Because if we think about what happens later on, I think this is just like him unleashing his psychic powers, because he doesn't actually use his hands in this.
I thought he did.
The way it's described later on by people who apparently saw it, it's literally like the bodies tear themselves apart. Like one guy, it describes as like this guy's entrails like pulled themselves out of him and then strangled him to death with his own entrails. And this is without Dark even touching them. Like it's
I don't
literally
remember
just.
that. I remember it describing
one of the
him
people
as...
gives the description to the woman from the brothel.
I thought he like physically transformed and got like horns and shit, and then was actually tearing them up. That's how I remember it in my head.
I looked for a scene that described that because I thought that was what was going to happen, and I don't think that is it there.
Jimbus, what's your
I
recollection?
definitely don't think it. Oh, I agree with Obrium. It doesn't sound like this demon. If he
Okay.
was possessed, that would be the end of it.
Yeah,
So,
and the Eldar would
sure.
not be later on. The Eldar would not be like, "Oh, you're on the precipice. You're like almost being. You're not tainted currently, but you could go down a terrible path." They wouldn't be like that if he'd literally just unleashed a demon in the middle of the town.
Let me give you my
Because
interpretation.
you talked
it's
about Cherubale and because a demon host, a demon inside your body,
Yeah.
that's Cherubale, right?
Sure.
If Janus Dark had been Cherubaled, would they be coming back from it?
This is probably more comparable to Cage as opposed to like.
Okay,
Cherubale.
yeah. Although I will say part of the whole thing with the demon host is like part of their ritual of making a demon host was to void the body, right? So that there's nobody left. That's like detailed at some point. So that's why there's no coming back when you actually when you do it the official.
Eisenhorn knows that. Eisenhorn knows that his fellow Inquisitor is no longer in the corpse that tries to speak to him with his voice.
Let's not go into that too much.
Yeah.
Let's not go into that too much. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
But
I don't think it's just demon possession. I think this is just him realizing his psychic powers.
So obviously this is a king take on possession at the time, which hasn't stood the test of time. But the other half of what I thought there was that the demon possessing him is a Slaanesh demon who knows that there are Slaanesh plans for this body. They can't maintain that possession for a while, which then fits in with what was described later on, where a host needs to be strong to last, but this body isn't prepared yet, and they want to prepare this for a specific demon. So my take was, demon goes in, takes control, the demon ends up, it can't keep going, but it also backs out, rather than being banished out by a nearby null or a grounding staff or whatever the fuck they called that guy in the Last Chances, and Janus gets back to being in control.
I don't think that's what's happening here at all. Because later on, the Eldar even suggest that the voices inside Dark's head are actually his own. And I don't think if he could be possessed by a demon right now, why would the Harbinger not just possess him like anywhere he is? Like,
because
why does he have to
fully
specifically
prepared.
go to him?
He wasn't fully prepared, and he'd been prepared.
What does that mean?
How
It means there's an amulet on his neck.
Possessed?
Because there's an amulet on his neck. The amulet is basically a fucking loading bar.
The amulet is Slaaneshi, though. You're saying the Harbinger waits until the amulet is destroyed, and then like 2 days later decides, "Oh, now is the time. Now he's ready," and off he goes.
Okay,
that doesn't make any sense.
Okay, you know what? You are right.
Could possess him anytime.
You are right. This doesn't make any sense.
I don't think this is a possession, because the Eldar even suggest, as I said before, the Eldar suggest later on that the voices he can hear are not like demonic possession, because he actually, like, the Eldar laughs at that, and he's like, well, if you were actually hearing voices, then you might actually be, possessed, and he doesn't even contemplate that, because that would be insane, right? But like, he acts as if, yeah, from what I got, the idea was that Dark is not actually possessed currently. He just has some weird like dark bullshit inside him that was maybe like triggered a little bit, or maybe like massaged into being a bit stronger by the events he witnessed on the planet where he destroyed his legacy or whatever it is. I don't know what else going on.
We can at least find common ground and agree that this is the trope of unleashing the demon within.
Oh god, yeah, it was like a straight out of Cage's playbook.
I will say he doesn't grow the finger back. Instead, just the place where it's twisted off heals over smooth. You might think
okay.
And you might think that this is then like, oh shit, that's an interesting detail. He's missing a finger. Will anyone notice? Nobody notices this for the rest of the book.
It's literally never mentioned again, which is why I thought he just returned. Like,
yeah, it might as well.
I thought he'd just come back.
He should have just written that it came back, because if it was never going to be mentioned again.
Yeah, I mean, why couldn't it just healed over, right?
Yeah,
and like healed a new, grown a new finger.
So then we cut back to Simon. Simon has more chatting with Eldar. Go on.
We've discussed an alarmingly small amount of the story.
We're getting through, but the thing is, it's picking up, because a lot of what we're discussing is like overall about the book, really. Simon has a little chat.
Almost all of this discussion has been absolutely nothing to do with the story itself.
No, it's been fun though.
Yeah.
Like, it's an interesting discussion because like a lot of this is weird. Really weird in terms of, is it still canon? Is it not canon?
Sure.
Like, how did this even work? What is this plot? What is going on?
I actually have a note about the conversation Simon then has with the Eldar, because they're like on a ship, because it turns out the Eldar are just like, yep, let's get the ship ready. Janice will be here soon. Simon's conversation.
And they have a bag of dreamstones to make everything fluid. And I did like this, actually. I thought this was pretty clever in the way William King set up the initial dreamstone interaction. So we know exactly how much a single dreamstone is worth. And then the Eldar just pull out an entire bag of them. And I think Simon goes to like a bank or something and basically just like takes out a lien against these. He takes a lien against these stones. That is, it says something like it's enough to buy an entire hive city if he'd wanted to.
I have a note that his discussion with the Eldar kind of made for all right reading. It's introducing a lot of ideas about the setting through the like the sort of mutual exchange of information. It's not just plot exposition; it's world building. But we learn not just from what they're saying to each other, but also like the limitations of what they know. Sort of tell us things as well. There's a lot of like telling us what the navigators know and what the Eldar know, because the Eldar are like, what? So tell us about how this whole like traveling through the warp thing works, Simon.
Oh yeah, that was really interesting. Was how scared the Eldar were of actually normal warp travel.
Yes, which makes sense.
Well, at first I was really confused by this because I thought like clearly the Eldar understand what the warp is, but I guess like I assume the way gates.
They're like, the warp's fucked. Let's not go there.
I assume the webway is kind of like it is the warp, isn't it? But like it's sort of like a segregated version of it.
At the same time, the lack of knowledge by Simon Belisarius of the webway makes no fucking sense at all.
How much really?
Yeah.
I wouldn't
like later on, they're like all surprised about the webway. They don't know the webway exists, which is.
Did they ever mention the webway?
Might be,
would navigators know about it? I would think this was pretty.
Remember? Well, here's the thing. This is probably a retcon, but there is a Horus Heresy book where navigators are involved in the webway projects.
That doesn't mean that those navigators actually were able to keep that information and like make it a part of their like house records, though.
Yeah, and also it would be a retcon. So I guess I don't think it's unreasonable that when King wrote this at the time, navigators wouldn't know about it. I think that's reasonable. Either way, I thought the scene was like some good world building.
I like that too. I like that scene too. It was
also good. We talked. I think this scene also mentions waystones. I think.
At some point, we see I can't remember what his name is. The Farseer.
Auric.
Or something like that. Yeah, we see Auric. Auric has like another stone around his neck or something, and he says something like, "My soul is already protected. When I die, it'll be pulled into this so that I escape, eternal torment or whatever it is."
Definitely pulled into this waystone. It talks about waystones going into infinity circuits, which you're like, so this is what a spirit stone is, not the dreamstones. I got it wrong there earlier. Anyway,
yes, it doesn't really know what the dreamstone is.
Continue pausing on this point.
Can I point out how much of a trope it is, that entire scene with Dark earlier, like ripping everyone to part because he got really, really mad.
You don't like me when I'm angry.
It's such a huge trope of like main characters basically being able to unravel the entire world around them and fix it the way they wanted to, but it's just by getting more and more angry at the world. And this is like the perfect epitome of that, because he literally does that. Like he gets so angry that he just uses magic powers to just solve the problem. Yeah, he just fixes the problem immediately and then leaves.
Obviously, who I think runs off and nothing happens.
Yeah, he just disappears again from the plot.
And then we just forget about him.
I mean, to be fair though, if you were Weasel in that situation, would you not want to disappear from the plot as well?
Oh, I would. It's just very weird that we get to...
It's a sign. We spend all this time building up Weasel, and then Weasel went back to his home planet.
Well, think about it. This was meant to be a trilogy, though. This was meant to be a trilogy. Any one of these characters could have come back.
And book two,
Weasel could have been. Weasel could have been the. Oh God! What was that? What was that robot guy? I can't remember. I can't remember the Eisenhower plot at all. What was that guy's name?
No. Let's not go into that too much.
But Weasel could have been him, wasn't he?
Okay.
Oh, the wonderful character Weasel. We were so missing him.
Yeah, exactly.
People care so much about Weasel. Go and tell William King you're going to ask him for his notes about his plans for the.
What were you gonna do?
Sequels.
Anyway,
Where was Weasel? What was he doing? I have to know.
Anyway, look.
Oh, we get introduced to some more friends of Janice Dark's here, and my favorite character, who is the edgiest character alive, and definitely the edgiest character in this book, and is actually called Steel.
Kind of, but he's not like made out to be like a nothing personnel kid. He's made out to be like a fucking grey man type character who's extremely normal and unassuming, but is actually super like edgy still.
Yeah, but all the stories we hear about him are pretty damn edgy.
We never see him do anything this book except for like he gets out a sniper rifle at the end or something, but he's just like. Yeah, he's
just the ominous character in the background that everyone knows will murder everyone on sight.
Yeah, but he's also just like, he's our accountant.
It's so weird. It's such a weird introduction.
It doesn't. The characters treat him with this danger, but the characters like presented to us as this very like normal, unassuming looking guy.
Well, you say that
he's not cold. I wouldn't say he's Cold Steel, though, because Cold Steel.
I say he acts like that, but that's not how he's presented to us. Because when he's introduced, it's all about how he's like a secret part of the assassin. He's not even secret, actually. He's not even secret. He's not even a secret assassin. He is very obviously of the Assassin Order. And like we get all of these weird.
You say that they're like he's not. They describe him as being possibly more dangerous than Imperial assassins. It's just like what's going on?
Well, no, we're told he's part of the Assassin Order.
No, but like Order, are we? I thought they compared him to them.
I'm sure we are.
I think they compared him to the Orders, and also Order. The Assassin, Ordo Assassinator, whatever the fuck they're called. They are pretty, not freelancing for rogue traders.
Well, I thought it was very weird that one of the Ordo's assassins would have been here, but also I just searched Ordo Ass and didn't get anything. Where?
Imperial Assassin? Try just Assassin.
I need to know now whether he was actually an assassin. I thought...
Well, he was an assassin. I don't think he was an Imperial assassin. In that way.
Most of the crew and mercenaries thought Steele was the star of Venom's senior clerk. Simon doubted that even if he encountered one of the fabled Imperial assassins. Okay, you're right. He compares him to one of a fabled Imperial assassin in his ruthlessness and dedicated and ferociousness in killing.
Okay. Either way, is his name really Steele?
His name is Steele. Yeah.
Is that spelt weird or?
It's spelled a bit weird. It's spelled Stiel.
Oh, okay. That's Steel. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
We're told he's
Stiel.
We're told he's like the most badass guy imaginable, but also like you'd never know it because he's so boring and dull.
Yeah, he's the senior clerk, but he's also a vicious killer.
Yeah. We have him, and then we have the captain of the crew,
like strike forces or something.
He's like the quartermaster.
He's a sergeant,
guy.
Isn't he?
Yeah, he's random up, very generic.
Yeah, I literally don't know anything about him. I was just like, he's just a sergeant.
He's the guy who does that thing.
I think the only relevant character point to him is that he sometimes disagrees with Dark and gets a bit like concerned when they go to the Eye of Terror. And
also he accuses everybody of being the same kind of person that killed his parents or something.
Oh yeah, that was so unnecessary in terms of an introduction to that character. It was bizarre.
Weird. But yeah,
everybody they kill is secretly the guys that killed his parents somehow. Or his family. His family. No, I don't think it's just his parents.
Anyway, I think around all of this, what happens? Do we have more Eldar conversations later, or do we just get loads of Eldar now and then they leave when he gets there?
There is so much Eldar. Like all the time they're on the ship, it's just Eldar.
At some point here, I'm not entirely sure of the chronology. I've got a whole load of stuff which happens with like the Eldar discussion. I want to like touch on quickly, and then also Janice Darkon will just he'll escape, but then the combat Eldar was it like
Yes.
implied what path she's from? What like aspect?
Part of the
she
warrior.
is? Yeah, well, like what aspect? Jimbers, did
I
you
don't
get a
know.
read on that?
Exploding things is what aspect she's from.
She's not an aspect. She's not an aspect warrior at all. I guess she's supposed to be a warlock, but it never explains anything.
She's like doesn't seem to be psychically competent for an Eldar. She's a warlock.
Yeah, all I know
She's
is
generic elf swordswoman.
Yes, yes, she is.
well, she's like a saboteur almost. Like so.
Well,
so
she
the
sets
way
up here, right? She does.
You know what?
She does have like some future seeing ability here, maybe because she like sets up explosives in the right place, comes along at the right time, whisks Janice away at the right time, explodes people chasing them at the right time, and then they show up and they're like, right, I got him, let's go, right?
Yeah, can we point out that
So,
the
yeah.
Eldar here at least are actually useful? Because meanwhile, while all of this is happening, Janice's friends are sitting in a bar going, "I'm sure he'll be fine."
Yeah. Well, they have no reason to believe otherwise, I guess.
I was going to point out this is one of the most boring car chases I've ever had to read.
Yeah,
I actually don't remember what happened because it was that boring.
They flew away, and then it was pretty quick. It wasn't like an extended car chase scene. It was just like they flew away on a jet bike, and then they blew up the cars that were chasing them, and that was that. Right?
I guess.
Was it a jet bike? A speeder? Some sort of speeder thing. I don't know.
I don't know. I just remember things exploding.
Yeah.
She made things explode, and they got away.
Anyway,
Now-
I wanted to say something about the Eldar talking about causality. Because the way they talk about causality as Farseers is infinitely more intelligent than the way Eldar treat causality in every other fucking story I've ever read with Eldar in it. 99%
So are
of
you
Eldar
talking-
stories go like this. I could see something bad happening in the future. Oh no, I need to try and fix it. And then they will run in there and try and fix it, and what they're doing does nothing because it's fated to happen. Or they will run in there, try and fix it, and make it happen. Right? Whereas here, we actually have like some self-awareness of causality and the fact that they're influencing it. The fact that sometimes they'll have like they'll inadvertently create a future by trying to prevent them, and they need to be cautious with this sort of thing. Also, there's this whole notion of like, I think it goes into it a bit more later on. It talks about like the very fact of them observing it splits it into different futures because now they are aware of it and they can influence it. And I think that whole idea of it is actually an interesting, like, it's not very good.
Well, it's what a smart character with the ability to see the future would actually think, as opposed to what you're describing before. Like, this is actually the case of William King avoiding the massive tropes, where he's avoided the trope of I must change the future, and then failing miserably, or creating it, or causing the future to happen. He's avoided those two like major like future seeing tropes, and instead has actually approached it with an intelligent character. And I kind of agree. I quite like the way that I forgot his name again because it doesn't really matter. But the Farseer Auric, I really like the way Auric talked about his abilities, because it was always like very much the case of, but I don't really know. Like this is just like potential futures that we're seeing, and I'm trying to thread the needle to the one that is good.
Yeah, I kind of like that.
I got the idea that he was a really young Farseer as well. Like that he was kind of like not a very like not one of those ancient Farseers that have sort of got stuck in their ways. And
I don't know. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about when I say I've liked how it's characterized over how I see Eldar in other books. Granted, again, it's about Farseer. But then again, like almost every time an Eldar pops up in a book, it's a fucking Farseer.
So we also see him mention, somebody asks the Farseer about the Dark Elder that they've encountered. Like somebody makes some sort of really weird comment.
He's like, no, that's not us, or something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, this is like Janice like learns for the first time apparently that there's like two factions of the Eldar, which might be something else that Jimbers will comment on, in the sense that he didn't know that the Dark Elder and the Eldar were two different factions.
That's a pretty common
until
theme.
This conversation.
I think that's a common theme in 40k, and Imperium not knowing the difference.
Okay, but surely they can see that they act very differently, even if they've...
No, because they don't know enough about the Eldar, because knowing about the Eldar is prescribed knowledge. They're the perfidious Xenos.
But he's a rogue trader, right?
Well...
Would he not have any of this knowledge? Yeah, okay. Well, let's brush past that.
Don't think about it.
The next question is, why did Janice Dark, who has a friend who is Simon Belisarius, like literally like one of the high up nobles of one of the most powerful navigator houses in the entire Imperium, who takes out a lien against some Dreamstones that is enough to buy an entire hive city. Why does he think that he needs to use Justina as a fence? So why does he take the first Dreamstone to this random cultist that he knows to fence it for some cash?
Pass.
Because the plot needs to happen.
Yes, actually, that's the answer. Moving
I was
on.
going to say, when you've been jumping around, what happens to Justina at the end of this particular plot arc?
She goes, "Oh no, he got away," and the demon.
Oh no! Now I'm going to be punished.
The demon goes, "I will punish you, and I will make sure you enjoy it. Don't enjoy it. Something. I don't know. I'll make sure you.
Answer.
Yeah.
I think
I'll make sure I enjoy it."
And then she's out of the story.
Yep.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
What a waste of time you were.
Goodbye, Justina. I mean, she at least set up the whole Slaanesh cult thing. Fine. Weasel, he's gone.
Yeah, the Slaanesh cult thing, it never fucking pays off because
sure it does, because it tells us
here again.
Yeah, but it pays. It's
we know the bad guy now is the Slaaneshi
she's
like demons and stuff.
She's teed up the villain, and also has tied Janus into to this plot by having the Slaaneshi influence on him with the necklace and all that amulet, right?
Yeah.
So,
There's something
damning about her character. Her character has absolutely no agency beyond what it does to someone else.
I mean,
isn't that like a lot of people who deal with chaos and stuff? Yeah, I feel like a lot of people who deal with cultists and like in general are inherently like that though.
Her role in the story is to tee up.
It's not very narratively. There's no narrative satisfaction to her character.
I can agree with that. Yeah, she does at this point just disappear, and it's like, oh, it would have been more interesting actually if she had been the force chasing after him throughout this book, and then the big bad had kind of been revealed near the end, rather than her just getting cut out now. Because now, we've been talking for a bit, but we're like a third of the way into the book, maybe halfway at this point. Because all of this is
we're a third of the way in.
We're a third in narrative structure.
This story's narrative structure is a free act structure done with mathematical precision.
Yes.
This part of the story is done. This doesn't matter. Let's move on to the next part. The next part is the space voyage, which is mostly plot exposition and one single chapter of warp travel.
Well,
this chapter is completely pointless.
I love that chapter. I like the warp travel.
That chapter. That part of the story.
Yeah,
this part of the story is pointless.
Not much happens.
With only one interesting chapter, and the rest of it is just let's dump plot.
Well, so we have the warp travel. We have the weird scene with the Farseer and with Janus having an astrally projecting around the ship. We have some, we have more chaos exposition. And then it's like,
these are all very interesting scenes in their own right.
Yeah.
And they give a lot of weird information that I didn't know, or that I'm not even sure I wanted to know.
Yes. Should we start with the warp journey? Sorry, go on.
I'm sorry. I don't know how you're going to edit this, but I have to jump back a sec. Do you remember when she picks him up in the car after he escapes from that thing, and they're about to go to like the weird, stupid chase that is boring as hell?
Yes. Yeah.
She says something to him. She opens the door of the car and says, "If you value your soul, get inside the vehicle." And then he just dives in. And I feel like this was like, what am I thinking of? There's a quote like that. There's something like, "Get in if you want to live," or something like that.
Follow me if you want to live. Terminator. Yes.
Yeah, that's the one.
Come with me if you want to live.
Felt like a really shit Eldar version of that.
Yeah, okay.
Hey, you hack.
Sorry, I had to go back for that.
Yeah,
anyway, carry
that's
on.
Fair. So the warp journey, I loved it. I liked the depiction of it. It felt there's like a bunch of different depictions of warp travel, and to be honest, normally I quite enjoy them. I think it's probably a quite easy thing to throw into your book. And
are you saying you'd enjoy the warp travel in Ruinstorm?
Okay, fine. I didn't like that one. God damn it!
Can I compare this to William King's other description of warp travel, which is
that was from Ragnar's perspective. Yeah.
Yes. So is this really interesting because obviously from Ragnar's perspective, they all get strapped into the seats. He's heard like all these crazy stories about it. Everything is like nervous and tense, and they're like, "Well, what is this actually going to be like?" And it's a very discomforting and kind of disorientating experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like in this case, we get it from the navigator's perspective, and this was this was super interesting. I really enjoyed this description. Like, this was probably one of my favorite parts of the entire book. Simon describing the way that he prepares. So he goes into like a mental state of like a kind of like a meditative kind of trance.
Hit me with them drugs so nobody wakes me up.
Well, he doesn't even need the drugs at this point.
He says he doesn't need them, but he still has them in case someone would wake him up. He's like, I don't need him to get into the trance, but I don't know what these idiots are going to do in the ship.
That's a good point. Fair. So and then he's like, okay, this is going to be a crazy jump. I'm literally jumping into the Eye of Terror, and so
and there's this whirlpool thing, and they're using the sort of I guess abstract interpretation of like centrifugal force, but with
he kind of like gravity boosts himself out of this whirlpool towards the Eye of Terror. And what's really interesting, I wanted to ask you guys about here, is because we don't get any sense of actual time scale.
Yeah.
And I assume that it's almost like from his perspective, it's almost like he jumps in, they do a little bit of sailing, and then they hop out. I don't know how long this takes, or how close they were.
I remember it feels really quick as it happened, and then afterwards he gets out of his chair and asks how long was that, and it was like a week or something.
Okay, because what was really interesting, and I don't remember if they mentioned a time is the thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it was like a week or something. I'm not 100% sure. Either way, I do remember this.
Is that how navigators work?
Fuck, it depends on who you're asking. Which author are you asking?
Well, for example, like a lot of the Horus Heresy stuff, I feel like they go into the warp and the navigators are just walking around, and then whenever they need to come out of the warp, they come back, and then they do the thing again.
It's all a case of what their book is wanting to do. Some authors treat warp travel as basically hyperdrive with added steps.
Well, that kind of felt how warp travel was in the Space Wolf books, didn't it?
Yes, but that could have been just because, as you said, it was from Ragnar's perspective.
Yeah. But
I mean, this is crazy. Like, this description is absolutely insane. Like, he's like battling against like sort of like demon mirages, and like you can feel them like scraping the hull, which is consecrated silver, and it's such a vivid and like interesting description. And then on top of all of that, we get an introduction of something which I'd never considered before, which is. And actually kind of undermines the fact that he doesn't know how long is passing, because not only does the Emperor's Beacon on Terra and the and the Eye of Terror kind of provide two way markers to be able to kind of navigate and position yourself by, but the Emperor's Beacon also pulses with a temporal indicator to give you an idea of how far, because all of his navigation is done by like move to the right for 3 pulses, straight on for 5 pulses, like, slow down into this position for 10 pulses, and then translate. And that's a good point. Super key. I was like, I never thought about this before, but if you imagine how navigation would have been historically, but also like how we would have to navigate in a place where you have no idea where anything is other than these 2 points.
I'm going to say something again that I said last episode. This is such a you thing to bring up.
This is such a huge part of that section, though.
Not for the narrative, it isn't.
It's a huge part
for this story.
To Simon. Yeah, for Simon's character, though, it is a huge part of this entire
it's
process.
more for the world building. This is kind of big implications.
But specifically in the way Simon is thinking about this, he makes the temporal pulses of the Astronomicon. It is key to how he does his job, which makes it, as you said, a huge thing for the world building.
I kind of glossed over that, but that's fair. That makes sense that it has. I don't know. I think you're putting more thought into it than it was intended to be read with. I'll say like that.
I don't know about that. I feel like it was put there specifically because that was what it was for. But it does beg the question of if he is counting all the pulses, then he should know how much time has passed.
The warp's wishy-washy and weird things happen.
Well, it's not. Yeah, but the warp might be. But the Astronomicon clearly isn't, because that's how they navigate.
Time's fucky in the warp as well.
I don't know. I think the Astronomicon is pretty solid. That's why it works. That's the whole point.
I think that this is...
I don't think
you are trying
to
ascribe a certainty to this that I don't think
there's
merited.
getting around. I don't think there's getting around the whole point that William King introduced that temporal aspect to the Astronomicon on purpose for this very reason. And then he sort of forgot about it later on as well.
I don't know that it's necessary.
Well, it's not he forgot about it, it's that nobody else gave a shit.
which annoys me because I think that was a really, really good introduction, and I
Okay.
think
I
it was
would be curious.
I like
When
the
we go
demons.
further into Abnett's books, how Abnett describes, because he does describe Warp Trail and he does describe the Astronomica and other parts. So, be curious to see how Abnett's
We'll have to think
fiction
about that when we
compares.
read that again. Yeah. I liked how demons were described here. Normally,
Well, the problem with the way the demons are described is that it's so obvious these are demon entities.
yes. So here's what I'll say, and you know what? This is similar to Ragnar's Claw when we talked about it there. But with demons, I think it's especially interesting because normally I'm like, I really love these things like these Abnett demons where it's just this horrific fucking mess of shit that doesn't make sense to a human perspective. That's just horrific, and it isn't just a product, but and I think we talked about this in Ragnar's Claw and said that when it's describing things like here's what an orc looks like, here's what Gretchen looks like, it was more effective product placement, I guess, than what we often see now. And I think I sort of, like, when I looked at how it was describing these, and it's like, yeah, these are androgynous crab-clawed women who are attacking the ship, you know. But it didn't
It turned up later on, though. So it's
but it didn't just, like, say a demonette was attacking the ship. And I think that's a big thing. It's, like, describing these... It is still product placement. It's describing the product name, but it's not just like using the product. It's describing the product, but it's not just using the product name as an identity to call out, you know? So I don't know. There's something I like about, like, I much prefer the androgynous crab-clawed women who are obviously demonettes to demonettes attack the ship. And this especially gets egregious in modern 40k where they have ridiculous, like, adjective, noun, verb names.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
You know,
I would much rather a description of what something is than just the name, and I'm just like, what is this thing?
And also just the way it characterized them, it actually felt like, I don't know, there was more to it. Like, it did characterize them in a way that made it interesting to, like, see it talk about it, rather than just... Which is also good product placement. If you're trying to do product placement in a book, you know, it's good to say it's your crab-clawed woman with blah, 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 and describe the way they act, and the vibe that they're giving off to the characters who's seeing them, rather than just be like, oh, it's one of these products, and then, like, let that do the work. Like, I don't know. I liked it. I think.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
I think William King does far more effective product placement than modern authors.
Well, so I think this is a good comparison to Space Wolf. Yeah. Because so much of Space Wolf was very much like describing things for the first time in a way that the reader might not have actually seen before, and so he couldn't just use a name like demonettes. You had to actually describe what they were.
Right, because I guess as a and I guess the same is true for Farseer, where, like, as a sort of fiction franchise, it's fairly new. It's expecting people to pick it up who aren't already familiar with the product. Who might, as you said, I think, Jimbus, go, I recognise that. That's that thing from that book, rather than the other way around.
So I'm now going to point out that this section of the story is 7 chapters long.
How?
Only talks about one of those chapters.
How is it 7 chapters?
Okay, so
the other 6 chapters are nothing more than endless plot dumps and exposition in the most clunky and boring way possible.
Well, can we go to the second?
Jimbus is not wrong, though, because that is a whole lot of conversation is basically the rest of this entire section.
Well, should we get into, like, I think it's basically 2 conversations that happen.
So, hold on. There's
far
few
more
things
than
that
2.
happen.
There's about 3 or 4. There's also a dream, and there's a moment that Janus gets his Indian mark on his forehead.
A lot of that is... I'm counting a lot of that as one conversation. So my 2 conversations are
also the dream sequence, which of course we have to pad out the story.
Sure, okay.
Before you get into the actual plot relevant ones, can I point out that when they first get to the ship, Dark and Simon have a conversation where they basically just complain at each other for keeping secrets for what is probably 3 or 4 pages, and then reveal a bunch of stuff that we already know, but they don't know yet. They haven't told each other yet.
They don't know each other, no. And then
it's really funny for me.
And then Simon maneuvers. He does like a maneuver where he goes, well, I don't know, maybe you should go and ask. Because I can't.
Oh, fucking shit. I'm now going to have to just point out that in the first part, there is a section where Janus is sitting on a chair described as having been carved of human bone, and that part no comment from over.
Wait, what? I don't remember
I forgot. I glossed over this. The human bone chair. God.
Yes.
Jealous.
That sounds heretical.
There's all kinds of really strange shit in his books.
Well, I just this conversation was worthy of pointing out, just because, like, it is one of those things where it had to happen. Like, it had to happen that at some point they would have to talk to each other and that they would have to share the information they have, because they didn't know. There was a lot that Janice knew that Simon didn't, and vice versa. But we didn't need to see that happen. But for some reason, we got the entire conversation, and it didn't really give us anything new.
We didn't need to see the bit where Goldmember starts teaching Two-Face McDuckman about how to control his powers either. Which is like such an obvious scene.
Well, okay.
Wrote. We had to have it.
I had forgotten about the Simon's...
Also, the Eldar smoke weed.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, everyone. There's so much hookah smoking in this book. It's like the hookah smoking coupled with the... Oh, there's porn on the walls, and they're having their mandated orgy in the corner.
Well, hang on. All right, hang on.
No, on the bridge of the ship.
Can we get into the two conversations I was referring to? One of them is the general conversation that happens between Janice and the Eldar. So I think Janice goes off to the Eldar and is like, I want to have a chat with you. I think basically nothing comes of that. Then he astrally projects and dreams a bunch of shit and gets pulled into some Eldar Farseeing ritual. Or it's like, what the hell are you doing here, astrally projecting?
So while this is happening, we have to ask why the Eldar still haven't realized that there is some sort of weird chaos artifact around Dark's neck, which, while they were also trying to do like psychic stuff on him.
Yeah, I was thinking this, and then afterwards, this is just kind of hand waved as now they realised it.
Suddenly they realise and they destroy it, and he's like, "Oh my god, you almost doomed us all!" It's like, what? You've been in his presence for like literally weeks at this point.
And also, there's a whole thing of Janice like it not twigging like this protective charm from this person who I've now learned is a Slanesh cult leader who was actually trying to. And he
keeps
just
this thing.
It just doesn't occur to him that maybe this thing might be dangerous. But it also like. To at least the story does like forget about it rather than have him willingly, consciously hold on to it. I guess, which is it's not great.
Isn't that a sign of a bad storytelling?
I guess, but it's bad storytelling rather than annoyingly stupid characters.
You could explain it away as being like, it is manipulating him to a point where he doesn't think about it. But I don't know why the Eldar don't think about it, because like the Farseer casts like. Yeah, the Farseer does like weird psychic stuff on him literally the first time they meet. And so like you'd think at some point he would have realized there was like...
That's a point. When does he get the Dreamstone in his forehead? Fucking...
this is like during...
He gets it when he's doing the training with Goldmember.
Yeah, like one of the first like conversations they have when he does the training with the Farseer. Also, it was that conversation where they name dropped Farseer for the first time.
Literally
in a very dramatic
getting a gem in his
fashion.
Forehead.
Yeah, then he gets the gem in his forehead, and like he doesn't really complain that much, considering he now has like a Dreamstone literally grafted into his forehead.
Complains a little bit. I mean, nowadays getting a gem in your forehead is a nice sign of opulence. And I believe I in fact made this comparison. I made this comparison already. I just remembered with Eisenhorn with Tobias Maxilla, who also had a gem in his face.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But this guy, so we now have two base bejeweled rogue traders, although this one's a bit less keen on it.
Is it just the jewel, or does he also have like a weird Eldar symbol like crafted into his forehead?
I thought it was just a jewel.
Because he sort of says, my crew is going to think I'm like tainted by aliens.
I'm marked by the Eldar because this Dreamstone has been implanted into my fucking forehead. But yeah.
It's like crafted to his skull, and he's just he's okay with that.
He's like, this will help ward chaos away, and he's like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
I'm going to attach it to your forehead. Wait, what? Here you go.
During this conversation, we also get the very tropey alien race that doesn't understand sarcasm, like several sections throughout the conversation.
Oh, at the very least, I'll say it handles that better than some other fucking Eldar. But,
almost certainly. Also, I thought it was a very interesting section where the Eldar take it in turns to describe Slanesh, and every time they read a line,
that, the way they don't say they treat Slanesh like Lord Voldemort.
Yeah, they won't speak like she or they like the being that we don't speak of, whatever it is, because like it's really strange.
Power type thing.
Yeah, but whenever he, the male Farseer, describe or talks about Slanesh, he uses he, and whenever the female Eldar, the Path of the Warrior woman or whatever. I can't remember her name either.
Elf
Whenever she
woman.
talks about
Her name
Slaanesh,
is Athenas,
Athenas.
which rhymes with penis.
Oh, okay. That was.
I mean,
Honestly, this is very
technically,
helpful
I
for
think-
remembering her name.
Yeah.
Oh,
Whenever
here's the thing,
Athenas
this is-
describes Slaanesh, she uses she as a pronoun instead. So it was quite interesting because they do that for both Slaanesh and for the Herald.
I didn't notice
of
that.
Slaanesh.
That's a good detail picked up on, I think.
Okay, now speaking of the horny nature of the story, and it really does feel like it was written by a horny teenage boy, we are introduced to our second antagonist for this book, the Chaos Space Marine Zargan. Most
I love
generic
him.
fucking name possible.
It is
And
it's like a very
shit-
Power Rangers name.
It is. That's the thing. This book feels like it could be. This book is as simple as a Power Ranger story with none of the fun.
That's kind of a funny character.
I think that's fun.
I did kind of like him.
So I think this first scene has very clunky exposition between him and the Demon Prince. But
Yes.
I will say this: Zargan feels a lot like an Emperor's Children Space Marine, which is a lot more than I can say for King's Thousand Sons. In
You say that, but I like this Emperor's Children Space Marine more than I've liked any Emperor's Children Space Marine in the previous books.
You haven't read any 40k Emperor's Children.
That's a good point. All of my experiences with Horus Heresy, and in Horus Heresy they are incredibly annoying.
This actually feels like an Emperor's Children case. Well, there is the Eisenhorn.
Okay, I'm going.
Sorry, go on, Jimbus.
I'm going to point out that Zargan does not feel like he's got a metal arm. He feels like an iron hand who was suddenly turned into an impotent child.
That was a bit of a weird description. I was slightly confused by that.
I forgot about that. There's things going on, like he's hearing the music in his head, which is kind of funny. He's got a synesthesia, whatever it's called, where he's constantly like experiencing different senses as other senses. He's indulgent and gluttonous, like prideful. I don't know. He feels a lot like an Emperor's Children should. You know?
It's specifically described as he listened to the power chord.
Yes, the first time. The first time we see him, it's just the music, and then the second time he comes up, it just goes straight into he's listening to power chord, like the first paragraph of the second conversation. It's like, oh, very like Noise Marine themes, right? I mean, at this time, Noise Marines had the fucking guitar on their model, right?
This is after that. This is third edition, so they have lost a bit of their hair metal aesthetic.
Oh no.
Now, I need to describe his love barge, the Pride of Sin.
Oh.
He studied the command deck. The drapes were rich and covered in pornographic images. Sensors filled with hallucinogenic incense burned constantly. The far corner was a writhing mass of naked flesh, where some of the crew were celebrating one of the major ritual orgies demanded by the Liberator. One benefit of such a profusion of cults was there was always some holy day to celebrate. He leaned back on his throne and watched the old man begin the first of the ritual human sacrifices that would ensure they passed safely through the warp. A pity, he thought. The child looked barely 12, and she had such pretty eyes.
Oh yeah, it really makes you squirm, that last bit. Ooh. Which I guess is he wants you to squirm. He's not pulling any punches.
Earlier on, I said this book feels like it was written during No Nut November, and I'm going to clarify. It feels like it was written during No Nut November by a horny 17-year-old.
Sure. It's very, but it's
who also had learned about shock imagery and was just going a bit ham. But like the point there though is the point is the juxtaposition between the two like descriptions. So the description starts off like almost like jokingly over the top, like in stupid, and like just like it almost sounds like he's taking the piss out of like that entire premise, and then he jumps straight into like child ritual sacrifice, and it's like what?
Ooh. Yeah, it does make
that was a little bit of a.
It does make you squirm.
I mean, the helmsman of his shit was a priest of the Emperor.
Oh, I have this.
Sacramental wine and other unmentionable things. So obviously, that priest who murders the child is a child molester.
That felt strongly implied, if not explicitly stated. It's definitely very look. This Slaanesh themes, no punches pulled. It's really in your face. And giving everything that is normally behind the curtain as far as Slanesh goes in 40k.
I will note
Yeah.
at this point as well, like I was very disappointed later on because I seeing all of this happening, and especially with the hallucinogens in the air, I was all for seeing what space combat looks like when one of the ships is tripping balls like beyond reason. But William King thought ahead about this, so next time we actually see them when they're fighting, they don't have the hallucinogens. They don't have the hallucinogens pumping in the air while they're actually in space combat. Apparently, everyone's serious.
Well, you know what? We'll get to that later. We'll get to. Hang on, we'll get to that later.
Spaceship comes, he fucks off.
No. There is some, but we'll get to it. What's the upshot of this entire thing with the Chaos Space Marine gibbers? Because this is conversation 3 that I was talking about, or conversation 2. What's the upshot?
Is there an upshot?
There is an upshot. All of the several chapters where it cuts back here are basically one thing. It's the big bad saying, Zargan, you need to go and get Dark.
Yeah. I need my vessel.
Go get Two-Face McDarkman.
Yes.
Go get him. I need my vessel, is what he keeps saying over and over again.
And that's it. That's the upshot of conversation 2. So we have.
So conversation 2 is just repeating the point that we've already heard in the first part of the book.
Yep.
Well, except that we now introduce the second.
It introduces. Yeah.
It's narrative.
Introduces our new enemy.
Anything new?
It's a narrative.
Zargon.
Yeah, it adds Zargon. Basically, that's all it adds. It adds Zargon, who is narratively, I think he's the dragon. He's like the. I mean, he kind of is, but he's also like the dragon being like the big bad's like the thing you have to defeat to get to the big bad. Except he's not.
I know my pointless TV trope shit, but most of the people listening to this podcast hopefully do not because they have lives. So could you explain to them what a dragon is?
So the dragon is your big bad that is in your room before the final boss. You have to get past the dragon. So the idea, this guy is set up as if you are going to... he is like the actual like obstructing force for this book now that we're being introduced to, and we're like, oh shit, he's got a fucking Chaos Space Marine after him, which is bad. And that's it.
Yeah, that's pretty much.
That's what the dragon is, and that's how this is set up. And as it turns out, it doesn't end up being used quite that way, but that's how it sets it up for you here.
I mean, he is a big bad. Whenever we see like Space Marines or Chaos Space Marines in particular introduced into stories like this, where everyone else is just a regular person, it does add another element. It kind of reminds us, of the scale of some of the things that do exist in this universe. I always feel it is a bit weird when we juxtaposition that against the way William King set up Dark, with all of the absolutely ridiculous things he's done, including like killing orc like war bosses and stuff. Well, it kind of undermines the presence of a Chaos Space Marine, but at the same time, I still feel like it's
you've
kind of
something here
important.
Which is a Chaos Space Marine is a lot scarier than a single regular regular Space Marine. At least it has been described that way in all the early 40k books, because regular Space Marines now are like mass-produced type things, whereas Chaos Space Marines are all veterans of 10,000 years of war.
Well, this guy met Horus or whatever. He was there apparently.
Yeah. So Chaos Space Marines are a big deal in terms of experience, and also they're like pumped with warp shit, right? Although it does
make me think though.
The whole thing.
How do the Chaos Space Marines always survive that long? Every Chaos Space Marine we meet is
survival of the fittest. The ones we meet are the ones that did last that long.
Okay, but does that mean that is every Chaos Space Marine one of the original? Are they all like Chaos Space Marines?
There are renegades who join up and end up joining the legions, but a lot of them, narratively at least, are like veterans of the Long War, I think is the phrase.
Okay, and as you're saying, like they're just the ones we see because they're the ones that survived.
Sure, and also because they're narratively far more interesting normally than Renegade Man who just became a Chaos Space Marine for shits and giggles like 10 years ago. Normally you only see Renegades if it's a book about Renegades turning, or if they're being contrasted against like veteran Chaos Space Marines. So you narratively it's not really that interesting to just have someone who's a renegade, and then also there's no backstory about how they became a renegade,
Yeah, true. It's much more interesting to have a character that literally met Horus.
Yeah. So typically that's what you get. Especially when you want a single badass dude who is set up as if they're going to be a dragon. And you had this in like
And as Dune
Eisenhorn.
turns out to be a considerable disappointment.
Yes. Well.
Yeah.
So I
The
might
scenes he's
compare
in
this
are
as
interesting
well.
enough.
I think this is you can compare this to Mandragore from Eisenhorn. Emperor's Children, incidentally, are actually a sort of ideal pick for this because like they are a very fragmented legion. They're one of the more fragmented Chaos Legions, even though they all worship like they're all very into Slaanesh, except for Fabius Bile. But otherwise, they're all very into him, but they're very shattered. They all have their own sort of goals, their own pride. They do their own thing. So they're like ideal for things like this. As opposed to like Thousand Sons, where, well, you know, I've just said like this guy is a veteran who's blah, 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 blah. Then we have like fucking, what's the guy's name? The weird Thousand Sons kooky sorcerer guy from the Space Wolf trilogy? Like,
Maddox.
Maddox. Well, he was just very weird, and you know, and that Thousand Sons depiction is very at odds with how Thousand Sons are now. But this Emperor's Children, just fine, really.
It was really funny to hear about all the stupid antics apparently that they get up into the warp. It was almost like Looney Tunes level of bullshit. Like they're just like fighting, and he fell out with his superiors, so he just invaded his castle or something and killed all his slaves, and then he just left, and like his superiors like tracking him down and trying to hunt him, and then they're just having like they're getting up to all sorts of weird Looney Tune antics in the background while like the Imperium is just doing Imperium stuff.
We get Zargan's little backstory. Where he's like being like, oh, we'll work it out. Just like having this weird blasé attitude.
I'll smooth it over.
Talking to this demon prince who does not have time for his bullshit.
I mean, to be fair to him, right? If you become an immortal and all of your superior officers in your army become immortals, would you really want to maintain that officer structure forever? Like, where's the advancement? Where's the opportunity to do anything to advance at all if everybody is also immortal, like in your entire army?
Yeah.
It just seems a bit screwy.
Especially if you are a legion who is entirely like devoted to ideals of pride and excess and ambition and shit like that. You're gonna fragment and do all sorts of shit.
Yeah.
Do we have?
Can I point out that like we are like jumping around all over the place to the point where my notes are now just a complete mess because I'm looking through my notes and there's things here from like that happened way before this introduction. There's things here that happened like before, definitely way before sections we've already talked about.
Like what? I was about to ask, like, is there anything else we want to talk about from the journey?
Well, I'm just getting now in the section to my notes because like after a bunch of the other things to the section where Simon does the navigating bit.
Oh. How is that after the chaos shit?
We talked about that like an hour ago.
Yeah, how is that after the chaos shit? I thought that came.
But we
first.
didn't talk about several conversations they had before that, though,
like
which is why I'm discovering it now.
Was it an interesting? What's your note?
Matter.
Yeah, what have you got on that? What's your notes?
The note I have before that section of the navigation thing was the fact that like Simon apparently talks about his the library. I don't know what this library is, or whether it was relevant to like wider in the lore, or whether it is literally just his house's library.
I think it's just world building for his house and the idea of how navigator houses work, which is nice.
We might see that library again in Wolfblade. I'll have to go back and check.
Well, it's a library that apparently has 1 billion volumes, which I thought was kind of fun. Especially since that equates to about 16 miles worth of shelving.
Now, since we're jumping back and forth, I'm also going to point
16,000 miles, sorry.
earlier in this, where Janice doesn't know what a psyker is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And neither do the...
There's a lot of areas where Janice, who's Two-Face McDarkman, fuck, I hate his name. His name is so fucking generic. Two-Face McDarkman is the worst rogue trader because there's a lot of stuff he doesn't seem to know that he should know in order to be a rogue trader. How the fuck did this guy get a warrant of trade if he's this much of a dumbass? Why
is his name Two-Face McDarkman and then the navigator is called Simon? Why does he get this like symbolic name and then you have Simon the navigator?
Because the symbolic name is a symbol of what? Because the symbolic name ties into what happens to him in the end.
Well, like you know what, Jimbus, I will say this. I don't think it necessarily does clue in what's going to happen at the end because you could also Because
I made the fucking
because
call of what was
oh
going to happen
sure
at the end, like
sure
around about this point of the story.
sure
I'm
but
like, yeah,
okay
that's
yes
what William King's doing.
but you do have a major red herring at the start of him being like possessed or seemingly possessed, or at the very least narratively unleashing the demon within, right? So you could take the Janus to refer to that.
Yeah, you could,
right?
especially if you believe that he was possessed, earlier on in the story too.
Which I actually
although,
did.
yeah, this is the bit. This
In
is the bit
King's
with the
Own Way.
Eldar. This is the bit with the Eldar where we get the idea that the Eldar just think he's a psyker. So this is when the conversation where they teach him what a psyker is, and he somehow doesn't know what a psyker is. This is where we kind of realize that or the Eldar seem to think that he's just a psyker. They don't even remotely suggest the idea that he's actually possessed, or that there's a demon within him, or that he's even a link to a demon. Other than we'll find out that the necklace is kind of doing some bullshit.
Yes.
So things I noted about the navigation thing that we didn't talk about. Simon mentions the 7 great errors of navigation. The only one of which we get to see is complacency. Don't get complacent.
What are the other 6 errors of navigation?
I need to know. What if we need to navigate something? That was kind of
Forgetting which way is north. That's a big one.
That's probably a huge one. Don't. Oh, actually, we did kind of. It wasn't talked about as a great error of navigation, but it was an error. He mentions that apparently a bunch of navigators sometimes lose their way because they lock onto other random events and think it's the Astronomicon, which seemed a bit stupid.
Yeah.
Like, how do you accidentally think that some sort of random warp storm is the Astronomicon? But okay. Another thing about that was he talks about how the warp changes. He says constantly, but at the same time they have maps of certain things, which suggests that it doesn't change constantly and it is somewhat consistent.
Well, I think he said it like changes over time. So the maps take a while before they're like really out of date.
So I was gonna ask, because like that seemed interesting, and then I remembered that the difference between like 30k and 40k is obviously 10,000 years, and how many generations of people that would actually be. So are we talking like millennia? Do they actually like? Do we get anything?
This is wisely left completely open.
So like the warp could change like overnight, or it could change over like thousands.
No, but as in this story has not pinned down anything at all for timescale.
I see. Yeah, so that makes sense.
Open for any.
That's why I was kind of asking
going forward.
That's kind of why I was asking you guys the question of like, do we get any information like that anywhere else that kind of hints on that?
Well, it depends. Like, I think if you destroy Cadia, things can happen quite quickly.
That's just because you need to sell more toys.
Yeah, that's it. You want to sell more toys, and suddenly the warp shifts a bit.
So it was that conversation. That was the key bit I missed as well. It was that conversation where Simon talks to the female elder, and she's like super scared about going into the warp. Mm-hmm. And they talk about, they sort of like suggested like the webway and stuff, but Simon doesn't really know what the webway is, so he doesn't know what to ask for. That conversation was weird. As I said, that was the one where it felt like the Eldar was kind of flirting with him, and he was kind of flirting back.
Right, because
and it was just a strange conversation.
Which goes very well with Jim's interpretation of her just being like an elf woman, because that is the trope. That all elves are like horny.
There are literally scenes King has written in fantasy books where high elf women do that to human men.
But the key,
I think Felix.
The key here is that this was very reminiscent, for me at least, to a scene where Ragnar, as a space marine, has a similar conversation with one of the female, with the female Inquisitor. Yeah.
Shit, that's
right. And we remember thinking at the time, like, why do they sound like they're flirting when they really shouldn't be?
I think King just likes
because Ragnar's the only space marine who actually got to use his dick.
No, but not that often.
That doesn't mean it's still.
This is Ragnar's claw. We're talking Ragnar's claw. So I think
that doesn't.
I don't think this is an elf thing. I think this is just a horny William King thing.
I think William King likes to write these scenes, and he can't help himself even when it doesn't make sense.
It's probably the horniest thing that you couldn't hand wave away as being about Slaanesh. Right?
Probably. I can't imagine this being about Slaanesh, since it's between Simon, who is not really tainted at all, he's a navigator, and between the Eldar, who's supposedly fine as well.
Athena's the penis.
Athena's the penis. Anyway, so we have that, and that's the bit where Simon ruminates on the origin of navigators and he doesn't really know.
Sure.
Oh yeah, and this is where the Eldar later, like the next conversation, is where the Eldar also tells Dark that the voices were inside him all along. And I've got in my notes here that says, "Ooh, how edgy!" !
It feels very. I don't feel like that adds. I feel like that detracts from the story rather than adds to it.
Well, yeah,
The
and it's
idea
kind
of
of this
it
is
being
where
We
corrupted.
need 7 fucking chapters of this where you could have summarized it in 1 or 2.
Well, we basically did. This is basically a warp travel sequence and 2 conversations. The Eldar talk to the crew and do stuff with Janus, and we are introduced to the dragon.
Yep.
And this is a third of the fucking book.
Yep.
Our next trope comes from the same conversation, which is that Janus is, as a host or as a psyker, one in a countless billions of humans that only turns up every
The
1,000 years or
protagonist
so.
is special.
Yeah, but also, I'm pretty sure there's more than a few billion humans in the Imperium over a 1,000-year period. So he's more than just one of countless billions if it only turns up every 1,000 years.
Yes, this is true. There's an awful lot more than 1 billion humans every 1,000 years in the galaxy.
Anyway, he is a vessel fit for a demon prince, apparently. And this is very, very, very rare, as we are told.
And also very bad.
You didn't ask me a question. If he's a special, super rare, how is he not picked up before this and sent to the Black Ships?
How is he only finding out now that he's a...
Good question.
How did the first time that his psychic powers manifest, he literally obliterates a room full of gangsters? Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway.
You could argue that maybe his psychic powers have been manifesting and helping him the entire time, but if that's true, then how did no one else notice?
Just don't think
how
about it.
How did the Navigator not notice?
Don't think about it, is the answer.
So I had a question for you here, which we kind of maybe covered. I don't know. You can maybe add to it if you feel like it's relevant. But do we know where the Navigators came from? Do we know if the Emperor created them? Do we know if they came from just before the Emperor, or what's the deal here?
I don't know if this was canon at the time, but the current canon, I believe, is that the Emperor was involved at the current canon is basically that the Emperor set up all sorts of shit to happen in the future of gene meddling and other things. So he set up the Mechanicus to develop into what it is. He set up the Navigator houses to develop into what they were. The whole the Emperor basically did everything. Is the current canon.
So you're saying that the Imperium was as the Emperor designed it?
Yeah, the Emperor sowed the seeds for the different moving parts that now make up the Imperium. But
I thought he was a genius.
Yes.
Well,
a large amount of the Imperium is non-functional.
Well, except for the religious branch. That didn't go according to his plans.
I mean, let's be honest, the Emperor... There's so many different interpretations of him.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of it is just fucked. A lot of it is oh, the Emperor is so genius. Why did he do this stupid thing? But yeah, does that sound about right, Jimbus, about Navigators?
Well, here's the thing. I was going to go into a spiel about God Emperor of Dune, but I really couldn't be bothered.
Well, you know what? I have always thought that is weird, how fucking lame and wimpy the God Emperor of Dune felt when I read Dune. And then I saw the Lynch movie, and when I read the Dune book, and then you're man, this ain't much of an Emperor, is it? Compared to 40k, which pulled an Emperor out, presumably part inspired from this.
Everything is bigger in 40k, though.
True.
Yeah.
Except for their Navigators, who are just normal people.
So we've been stuck in the fucking warp travel thing.
Yeah,
hold on a minute, because there's so many more things to
rattle through.
Oh god, we're never gonna get through this, are we?
It's like reading the warp
Eldar
section.
The Eldar suggests here that all sin and vice of every species apparently comes from chaos. Is this true? This seems a bit like a simplification, I assume.
Yeah, I don't know. That feels like it's not canon. Right now, I think there are some things where there's something's been imprinted on all sapient species, and those things are mostly things I want to say the Catan the Nightbringer, which has imprinted a fear of death on all the species. I don't know that Chaos Gods in their current state, generally at the moment, I would say the opposite is true. Where the chaos, the warp is a reflection of what's happening in the material world, not the other way. Although it is a corrupting influence, but not in a general species way.
Because the Eldar seems to suggest here that Slaneshi demons are causing you to gamble and causing you to drink and shit like that, and it just seemed a bit weird. But then also I see the Eldar sitting in their rooms smoking weed, and I was just okay, well,
no wonder this happened.
Yeah, we haven't lost. Apparently we haven't lost all of the.
Which is very tonally off for the whole
it was
strictly disciplined lifestyle
absolutely.
of Eldar.
Absolutely, especially
Hey,
later on.
If Gandalf can smoke weed, so can Eldar.
Is this another elf thing? How are elves in fantasy? Are they constantly at the hookah?
Wood
Probably.
elves are the ones who, if any elf is going to be depicted as smoking drugs, it's the wood elves.
Okay, but
Touch of nature.
what would the 40k equivalent of a wood elf be? Would it be
Exodites.
Would it be the Exodites? They're a little like niche, aren't they?
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah.
Fine. I was going to
There's,
say that they have a very small presence compared to what I'd imagine wood elves have, but yeah, fine. You're right.
There's also a jump scene here where the Eldar goes and talks to Simon, the female Eldar, and then right after that, Dark turns up in the Eldar's room and starts screaming at him for telling Simon something, which suggests that Dark has Simon's room bugged. I thought I would just mention that.
Huh? That slipped by me.
Because he never has a conversation with Simon, and they don't talk about it
But
later on.
that conversation, the conversation is pointless. The whole thing there is pointless. Most of these 7 chapters is pointless.
Oh wait, no, wasn't it explained that Simon actually did go and talk to Janice, and Janice was like,
they had that conversation after, though.
No, it wasn't. He explained he had that conversation, and the Eldar was like, "Did you actually confirm that this is what he thought?" And he goes, "No." Like he did actually. He talked to Simon a bit, and then Simon, like when he said it, Janice was just like, "Right, that's it," and just stormed away instead of confirming what Simon knew.
I think I just misunderstood that. Then.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I remember that. Yeah, they did, but it was pretty pointless.
So I just remembered what it was that they were apparently mistaken for the Astronomicon, and it is so much stupider than storms.
It's the sirens.
Apparently pirates mimic the Astronomicon sometimes to lure people off course. Which
I don't remember this.
I
don't remember this.
How does a group of pirates do that?
I don't remember this. I remember it mentioning sirens with calls.
When they're in the warp.
Things.
Yeah. When they're in the warp, Simon talks about sirens, which was a really interesting description again. While they were actually in the warp.
What do you mean? That's like the most generic fucking. Oh yeah, we're gonna put sirens in because
obviously very very like Greek mythology kind of bullshit, but. The
whole story is Greek mythology. This is literally the hunt for the golden fleece.
Let's come back to that. But yes, it sounds like an interesting one.
It was just the fact that like apparently groups of pirates are able to mimic the Astronomicon to the point where it confuses Imperial navigators. Just seemed.
I missed that. That's funny.
It just seemed like insane. I wondered how like any of this stood up to like modern interpretations of like the warp.
That'd be pretty tricky.
None of it stands up at all.
Technically, none of this ever happened because this has been published on the Heretic Tomes, so it doesn't count.
Technically, this book never happened, and we've been wasting the last few hours of our lives.
So Simon also refers to the beacon or the Astronomicon as the Beacon of Terror, which is very confusing naming considering we're now navigating using the Eye of Terror and the Beacon of Terror.
Well, maybe if you're listening, but this book never had an audiobook, so...
Well, no, still when talking about it, it's still clearly confusing.
Yes, okay.
Did they never think that having the two like most noticeable beacons named almost exactly, not exactly the same, but using 2 different words that sound the same when pronounced was kind of complicated?
No. Next question.
Anyway, I've got the sirens noted here because I like the sirens. They were good.
I like sirens. I like that as it makes sense that Slaanesh should sort of act in that way, I guess.
So I feel like this is a narrative maybe problem, but because this is the first time we are encountering all this stuff, Simon describes all this stuff as if it's the first time he's encountering it as well. Now, I feel like this can't be the first time that he's encountered half of the phenomenon that he described.
We were literally told that like their last expedition that went bad was Typhon, which was right next to the Eye of Terror.
Yeah, but he's describing all of this stuff as if it's like caused by the eye and that he's never seen it before. You know, he's never seen the sirens before. He's never seen like the demons before. He's like, he talks about his like attempting to jump into the eye as if like it's the most insane thing ever. And like, he's never done anything remotely like this before. He's got to he says he's going to make notes for his house afterwards where all about like how they went into the eye. And he's like, this will get us all burned for being heretics. But every navigator does this. It's his duty.
On that note, about it being burned by heretics, it's very tonally weird, this whole, like, there's an interdiction on it. Are we going to bypass it? Ooh, we're going to get in trouble with the Inquisition.
Yes.
Like,
we'll
that is so weird. But that's so weird because modern 40k, it doesn't even get that amount of, like, this, in spite of how serious and grave they're talking about it, it is blasé compared to the tone the Eye of Terror is discussed in modern 40k. It's like, you might as well say, well, let's just jump into a black hole. You know,
Well-
like it's a massive. It is hell. It is literally like a
Yeah.
portal into hell that they're talking about entering. Like, right? This is.
Well, they're talking about like the demons coming like for the ship and stuff and coming
Yeah.
through the warp
This
and
is-
stuff. But they're not literally flying into the gateway into the warp.
Yeah, so the whole thing, like the Eye of Terror is sort of like warp space where the warp has bled into reality and like shit's funky. But like this whole thing about this interdiction and like, oh well, we're breaking the Inquisition's rules. This, you don't even get close to thinking about what does the Inquisition think. It's just like, no, this is just suicide. This is like. If this is
Isn't there a new
taboo,
Prosper somewhere in the Eye of Terror?
Don't worry about that.
What I mean though is that the fact
Yeah.
that there is like an entire Space Marine chapter has a new Chaos planet somewhere in the Eye of Terror.
Sortarius.
You know,
yeah.
It
This is
just kind of puts in perspective of what the hell they're flying into.
yeah. This whole thing is beyond normal taboo. This is not even a consideration for an Imperial character in any other book. What if we just fly into the Eye of Terror? This is not even like a question about is this an idea. This is just like it's just not on the table. It's not even up for discussion. And yet here they're sitting here talking about, oh, there's an interdiction from the Inquisition. Oh, we'll get in trouble for this. It's so
I think,
weird.
as you said, is the best description is like compared to what the Eye of Terror is in other books. This is like deciding to fly into a black hole, and they're sitting around discussing whether they'll survive. It seems crazy.
I'm going to jump into the broken escalator at the top of it. I hope I don't get in trouble with the police.
I hope there's enough of me left to not go to jail after I get run over by this steamroller.
Yeah, it's very weird. Just the tone, it's disgusting.
Yeah, as I said, like it seems weird. It seems bizarre. The way that the demons don't seem to be able to see Simon, so like he describes in several cases almost as if he's like a null. It's like he's a null of some kind.
But I guess, okay, you know what? This only just occurred to me now. But the reason for that might be, fuck that off. There's some fucking Eldar in there, and the demonettes know what they want, right? That could be an interpretation. That didn't feel obvious to me at the time. That's only just like occurred to me now.
Yeah, that's a good point, because Simon himself can see 3 like massive beacons of light while he's in the warp, and those 3 are the 2 Eldar and Dark.
Yes.
Which is kind of ironic considering he's a massive beacon of light in this scene.
Yes.
Anyway.
Oh, Bill King.
I'm going to ask this again. I'm going to regret asking.
Oh, they did it again. He did it again. Sorry. He did it again. He did it once in the Space Wolf books where do you know I said like whenever they describe the temporal distortions that the warp has, where like sometimes you go into the warp and you come out like it feels like weeks and it's only been a day, and sometimes you go into the warp and it feels like a day and it's been years. Like every time they describe that, they have to give both examples just to somehow show to prove that it does both things. And he did it in Space Wolf, and he did it here as well.
It's interesting actually, because I think I saw a chart at some point that suggested, like, I'm sure I saw something from an old source book at some point that suggested that it's always like you go in there for. Oh, you know what? That suggested it was one way. I'll just say it like that. But I know that like
maybe they were trying to obey relativity.
But narratively, there's always like the idea is the warp is a wishy-washy thing where anything could happen, because that's very convenient when you're writing books. And
maybe they were trying to like limit the flexibility for going back in time using the warp, because that seems like it would be kind of broken if the Chaos Guards could somehow send things back in time.
Well, I think there are stories where that happens. There's a
I know there's stories where that happens. You said that before.
There's the orc one, which I think doesn't have a novel associated with it, where an orc just goes back in time, sees himself, and is like, "I want my gun," and kills himself with his gun. It's like, I don't think it ever explains what happens. Oh yeah,
I feel like orcs could time travel without it being an issue, just because they're orcs.
It's very silly. Let's let them be silly. Let the orcs be silly.
This book is silly.
It is a bit. I'm gonna ask this, and I'm gonna regret asking it. Do you have anything else that happens during the travel over here?
Fuck's sakes.
I like the resurfacing like a submarine. I thought that was funny.
That's fun.
Like they describe the entire like the sea and the immaterium as if like they're going below the bubbling surface of the actual real space into like this absolute chaos of the depth of warp. I like that.
Mm.
So he's Oh, okay. No, that's to do with the Chaos Marine thing. I was a little bit confused when he described himself as being from the First Legion.
Who?
And I was like, the Zargan describes himself as like he was from the original Legion or the First Legion or something. And I was like, does he mean that is this going to be like some sort of weird traitor, like Dark Knight or
A Dark
like
Angel, a Fallen.
Dark Angel? Is it? Yeah. Or is this actually going to be like Horus's Legion or something? And no, it just turns out he was just meant he was an original Space Marine from the
Terran Space Marine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Are we done with these? And are we on to Act 3?
Yeah, there's another really confusing line in that though, where he says something like "fist of iron," and I thought he was an Iron Fist because of that.
Well, he does have a metal bionic arm.
It was like
his fat arm. He was meditating so hard that his arm fell off, and he had to replace it with metal.
Which really hurt his ability to play those power chords on his guitar.
Oh no. But it was like William King was going out of his way to like try to make you think that this Space Marine, this Chaos Marine, was any other Legion than the Emperor's Children, and
Other
then
than
just
the power chords, which were very Emperor's Children.
Yeah, okay, and then he was just immediately like, oh yeah, he's an Emperor's Child. He's an Emperor's Child.
I'm just trying to think. Was there the rivalry between the Iron Hands and Emperor's Children at this point, this early on in like the setting's development? I think there was.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this is like a little ironic then, already when this is being written, that this Emperor's Children has got the fucking Iron Hand. Okay.
Yeah. At some point the Farseer starts describing the butterfly effect, and then just like it's almost like he's going to hint at it, but then he actually just goes out of it and just it explicitly describes the butterfly effect, including using the titular butterfly in this case.
Yeah, he references the.
He basically just gives the description from Jurassic Park.
He references the 38,000-year-old idea of the butterfly effect.
Yeah, pretty much.
I think that's where that scene around like how causality works was, I think, which I mentioned about earlier. I thought was quite better handled than usual for a 40k book. Even if it feels obvious, it's still something that I feel most 40k literature fucks up.
Yeah, I'd say that. I mean, I at least my experience with the Eldar is kind of really annoying in everything else. And it was sort of annoying here, but not as anywhere near as annoying, because as you said, he's so much more self-aware.
Yeah, it was coherent,
he's so much more
and he was an intelligent character rather than completely blind.
Yeah, pretty much. And yeah, sorry, all these are completely out of order. It was just, I was just going back here and I was just like confused by all these notes because part of them happened in like completely different orders than we discussed them originally. Who the hell is Herman Block?
Stop talking about Farseer.
Is Herman the sergeant guy, the quartermaster type guy?
Herman Block is just here with a question mark in my notes, and I think it's because they mentioned his name as like a famous character, and then I was like, is he a famous character? Like,
I have no idea who Herman Block is. My guess would be the quartermaster because I don't remember his name.
Herman Block is a Farseer. No, sorry, he's a rogue trader who is mentioned as having conquered an entire continent with only 150 men and one rhino.
Yes, and I wondered if this was another story that like turns up somewhere.
But
does not exist. It doesn't matter.
But this does mark a great moment because your notes have caught up and the fucking journey is over.
No. Herman Block was an American chemist and inventor. He invented the catalytic converter, a device that removes pollutants from automobile exhaust fumes.
Oh, okay, great. We got that cleared up.
God damn it.
Okay, so we're finally done.
Fucking Bill King is a hack.
We're finally done with the journey, where a bunch of things happen, but really it's like, here's some things that had to basically here's some things that needed to happen information-wise for the plot, and here's a nice description of a stroll through the warp, and we're here.
We had 7 chapters.
We missed one trope.
Of them actually mattered.
What trope?
There was one more trope, which is when he's describing the butterfly effect. One of the examples is that somebody in another timeline chokes on a fishbone, which is used in almost everything to describe alternate realities, and I don't know why. How common is it that people choke on fishbones? That it turns up every time.
A lot less common now.
I'm choking on a fishbone right now.
Sorry about that. Anyway, carry on. We've finished the travel.
Okay, so they get there, And we finally have the reveal to the crew of what's happening, and also the reveal to us, the reader. They're after a magical black Eldar sword, and the crew can take whatever other treasure they want. And they pretend this is a secret mission for the Imperium. Everyone's like, yeah, sure, okay, I don't believe that, but let's go with that. I'm happy to be told that.
I mean, it kind of, it gives everybody at least like somewhat plausible deniability, I guess.
Yeah, they give everyone their plausible deniability they so desire, and it's a kind
not
of...
that it's going to matter.
It's like
Inquisition would kill everyone anyway.
It's a very, yes, it's a very like oversimplified but human reaction, sort of, you know? It's as opposed to things like explaining the stakes in the fucking Last Chances books.
Yeah. Okay. I can agree with that.
I get it as like I'm like, you know, this works.
It's a bit weird, but it's a human weird.
It'll work. It'll do.
Yeah. Like when they're describing this sword, and this sword was the description of this sword was weird, to me at least, and I couldn't figure out what the hell it was supposed to be getting at because I don't know anything about Eldar, and I think it made a little bit more sense later, but I don't know how much more sense. Supposedly the sword is an echo of the death force of the universe, compressed into a sword.
Yeah, so this is a really weird one. This is the sort of thing that feels maybe not canon, because I think the death force of the universe at this point is like the Catan Nightbringer.
That's what I thought. I actually have written down here. Is this the Nightbringer somehow?
I don't know how fleshed out Necron canon was at this point. Maybe they just got on their first codex. I don't know. Jimbus, any thoughts?
Like I know the answer.
Okay, well, you're as mystified as me then. Okay, excellent.
Well, basically, this book has rotted my brain so much that I just can't remember anything anymore.
Oh, okay. That must be it.
All of the actual lore has been replaced by the new lore of this book.
No, the lore of this book is so old. I've just decided that all the lore in this book doesn't matter.
Well, that's true.
This book doesn't matter.
Well,
so
that's
I
true.
just don't care.
It literally doesn't matter. It is literally not canon, but it's interesting to compare. But yeah, I think this probably would have come out around the same time as, or not much later than, the first Necron Codex. So yeah, maybe it's like not really up to date in that regard. Yeah.
This is the goal now. They're after this sword, aren't they? So
yes.
They're going down to the planet and they're going to find this sword, and it's in
the spooky Eldar temple. Where have we seen that before? Yeah.
Spooky Eldar temple.
Wait, hey! At least he's ripping off his own works now.
Oh no, he's ripping off Raiders of the Lost Ark.
I mean, really?
Well, they go into the temple. There's traps in the way, and
I mean, it feels pretty generic, but it's generic enough that I wouldn't have said that it was created by George Lucas.
I wouldn't compare this to Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's pretty... Yeah, this is just the treasures in a dungeon.
Yeah.
This is just the treasures in a dungeon.
This is more generic than Raiders of the Lost Ark. They haven't
got a strike force of Nazis here in the way.
No, they got the Emperor's Children.
Well, but they have a very different role.
Lies.
They have a very different role here. And the story takes a very different sort of turn. So
while they're in this temple, or when they're camping around the fire,
well, I have something to comment on here.
Sorry,
which is that this chapter of then, when they arrive and start going in, is called "The Birth of a God." Like,
yes, it's this long period where it's just Janice thinking about how the fall of the Eldar must have gone.
He's not thinking
for something completely pointless.
Janice getting a dream vision.
Yeah, he gets a vision of basically, like, this is the first time that I've seen in anything, at least, where we actually get, like, a pretty detailed description of how Slaanesh was born and how the Eldar actually fell in this case.
We get an echo of the birth of Slaanesh. We get to see the thing, this big fucking deal event.
The problem is that this whole thing has been retconned.
Oh yeah,
it really didn't happen.
It's very cool to see like this big event here. At least this now not canon version of
it isn't cool. It's the most. It's the most.
Nah, it's cool.
It's the most lackluster way of birthing a god I have seen. It's the sort of thing you'd have in like a sword and sorcery.
Okay, that's
an interdimensional god. Like
that's fair.
Slaanesh.
It's like, oh, we're doing the ritual. Oh no, it's a trick. Right, that's fair. But it's look, the way it's done, the way the birth of Slaanesh happens isn't cool. But like the very fact that you're seeing this event. It's just kind of feel cool to see as a 40k fan.
And I feel there's enough drama there as well.
It's also really weird to like I've been into this for a very long time. I had no idea that sitting away in some book that isn't canon anymore, there was a fucking somebody who's fucking seen the birth of Slaanesh in a 40k book. You know?
But
it's a really weird thing to find tucked away here.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's not like it's underplayed, I don't think. I mean, you can say it's a bit lackluster, and I think it probably is in terms of like the actual events that we see.
Yeah.
But in terms of like the sort of the implications that are implied by like Dark when he's thinking about it, is on a scale that I think is appropriate, if that makes sense. He can't quite comprehend the scale because he can't quite comprehend what an entire race of people, just dying overnight kind of really how that works.
The whole race dying overnight because of a bunch of people having a little ritual in this old building. I mean, it would be like if
it wasn't in an old building. It was kind of like it was on like a continental scale. I thought
not even continental. Many planets doing this at the same time, doing these rituals.
Yeah, they lined up all of these connections.
But I still agree with Jimbus because this is very different from the idea of in this story is that the Herald of Slaanesh or Harbinger or whatever, and some similar things like that, sort of built up this energy by encouraging behavior and encouraging beliefs and encouraging this ritual to happen, right? Whereas the current interpretation, the current canon, is that this was a critical mass of Slaaneshi behavior that coalesced into Slaanesh.
So,
right?
yes. Like, why are all these chaos gods? Why do they have to be made up of the worst aspects of the races of the universe?
Not necessarily. Like,
because
if you
that
think
way you can sell models of them.
But it's
where's the god of
one of the big.
Where's the god of understanding and the god of knowledge and justice and
the god of knowledge? The god of knowledge would be Tzeentch, right? Tzeentch has massive themes of knowledge, as themes of hope and change. But the thing is,
does he ever do anything?
The way these gods work is like by its nature, like a corrupting force that leads to bad things. Like I've seen an interpretation of it. Like, what if there was a chaos god of happiness, and you went out and you it's probably I don't remember where the fuck I saw this, but like imagine you've got like a god of happiness, and it inspires you to go out, and every day you go out and you do a deed to make somebody happy. You go buy some flowers and give them to someone and make them happy, right? And then like you've made this god stronger, and its corrupting influence on you grows. And sooner or later, you're now spending all your money on flowers while you and your children starve. You know?
Yes, but this is my whole point. Like, why do the chaos gods have to be that corrupting aspect?
Because it's like self-propelling. They're like them projecting this action into other things is then a feedback loop where they go stronger. This is very fan interpretation almost sort of thing, but I don't feel like it's necessary. Like there is this idea that they are inherently a force.
But what you're saying, though,
and they also do fight for their existence.
It sounds like you're saying that the virtues have to feed back into a corrupting nature simply because of what they are, because they get stronger from it. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, I kind of understand that. I guess it's an interesting interpretation. My thoughts when I was reading this was though, it almost seems like they're setting up, or the entire 40k universe is kind of set up in a way that is very reminiscent to me of Hyperion. I don't know if you've read the Hyperion book.
Nope.
So it's kind of the idea of like in the future at some point, humanity creates a god that then goes back in time, and it's like almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I feel like the Emperor in 40k is set up in almost the perfect way to be, or to fill that role almost, because all of the magic and all the power that we see, portrayed from in terms of the people, especially now with all of this weird stuff that apparently isn't warp related psychic powers, but is like faith based, like weird magic. All of that is kind of set up in a way, and we don't know any of the origins of the Emperor. We don't know where he came from. We don't know like how any of this fit. It just feels like he fits that role. He fits a very similar role to the god in Hyperion.
He's just sort of always been there, and it's like origins.
Yeah, but it's like all of the faith of the future. All of the faith of the future humanity sets him up to exist in the first place, even though that was temporarily out of sync. If that makes sense.
I mean,
it's a weird one.
That's a way you could interpret it.
I'm not saying I've seen that anywhere before. What I'm saying is, it reminds me of Hyperion. Is when I was thinking about this section.
How does this tie into Slaaneshi stuff?
I was thinking, why are all the chaos gods always the bad aspects of the races? Why do they have to always be the
Because that
darker,
way
worse
we
aspects?
can make models of them and sell those
Yeah,
models
I
to
mean-
people to fight their tabletop games.
Yeah, like from a creative decision point of view, they are supposed to be evil. So I mean,
Well,
and
yes,
and this
except
this
for-
sort of selfish. There is like this selfish aspect of the gods where they want to propagate themselves, even at the expense of the other gods.
Well, except we do see relatively or different aspects anyway made into gods, right? Because we learn in this story about some of the Eldar gods like Cain and
Well,
I
Eldar
can't
gods
remember what
are
the other ones are.
different and weird.
But also my point was, is the Emperor potentially not kind of like a chaos entity in the same regard, in the same way that the chaos gods are as well?
And
Obviously he's not necessarily all the worst aspects of humanity, is he?
I don't really.
That's actually more of. That's
Go on.
become more of a thing recently. I do know they have been stressing, I know Abnett also been stressing in later Gaunt's books, that the Emperor is basically becoming a chaos god.
I really don't
Yeah.
like. I don't know. I don't really get this vibe.
Yeah, all this belief in him is coalescing and he's kind of becoming a fifth chaos god.
I
Yeah,
feel
well,
like this is
the,
getting very fan theory.
This is something Abnett himself has brought up. His dead body has been wired into the Golden Throne, and so many people have believed him for so long, and he's basically become a new chaos god, essentially.
Kind of, or like at least a warp. He has a warp presence that affects humanity at the very least.
Your presence is almost. I mean, don't forget the Chaos Gods are. Here's the interesting thing: Slaanesh is a Chaos God who was birthed by the entire Eldar race, and apparently Khorne, Zench, and Nurgle were just birthed by humanity. Like Nurgle was just birthed by the Black Death.
So, well, kind
would
of.
be-
This is a bit all over the place in the canon though, because like some of the canon has suggested that they were born of humanity, but then other stuff is like, yeah, these guys have been about since way before Slaanesh. But also, there's like a whole thing of it being acausal, like whatever caused them meant that they would always exist. Although the fact that Slaanesh would always exist doesn't change the fact that it has a birth point when it happens. Like all of this stuff gets a bit washy with like different canon, and well, it is.
At the
I guess
same
it is
time,
interesting to compare.
Is thrown out the window and doesn't matter.
Well, that's what
That is
makes
true.
it interesting to
It's
discuss.
kind of the point as well,
Yeah.
is that this was deemed so out of off the wall thing that they had to get rid of it.
Well, I don't think so. I think it just didn't sell.
So they removed it from canon because it didn't sell.
Well, okay, that's fair. I don't think they removed it from canon because it didn't sell, but yeah.
Fair.
I
So
mean-
right.
Well, it's kind of yes and no. This didn't continue as a trilogy because it didn't sell, but because these ideas didn't stick and keep making it into the canon, eventually it became outdated, so they made it non-canon. So, like, no, but also yes, right?
Yeah, I guess. Anyway, I just took this entire story of like Slaanesh being born and the way, and the Eldar came across as like really strangely naive about the entire thing.
Yes, it was tonally
Um,
off, and you know, there's a lot about this whole thing that was tonally off. Like, also the attitude from the Eldar, like talking about Slaanesh, felt tonally off. Like the whole "we are him and he is us." Like, well, I guess technically, like this is something
I mean, it's the
reference
truest
a
thing an
lot.
Eldar has ever said, but it feels like they wouldn't say it.
Yeah, like technically, Slaanesh is made of it's modelled off Eldar behavior. So yeah, but that's not an attitude you see in the Eldar.
It felt like more than that. It felt like the way he was describing it, he was basically trying to say that Slaanesh was, and in the same way that Slaanesh tries to absorb all of their souls when they die, it sounded like he was actually implying that Slaanesh was literally all of the Eldar souls
Well, yeah,
amalgamated
That's
into
right.
a being.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Slaanesh is modelled after
that
their
is true.
behaviour because it uses that is still canon. That this coalescence, this event where this critical mass based on their behaviour built up, then coalesced and absorbed their souls into an entity, right? I think that's still the canon.
That makes sense with the way he describes it in the story, and
So
it kind of surprises me then, like that he said that though, because as I said, it's the truest thing that he says this entire book, and yet
That
it doesn't
an
feel
Eldar
like he
would
would
never
actually say it.
Yeah, it's just tonally off.
Oh, it's a case of we've got to have the character say the exposition so the audience can know.
Yeah. And then a ship with a massive cock on the front burst out of a warp. you want-
Yes. Alright, I'll do it. She looked old but huge, a warship of the most ancient imperial design. From memory, he called up all the blueprints he could see she did not quite conform. Changes had been made. Turrets had been added here and there, and weapons of a pattern with which he was not familiar. Gargoyles encrusted the hull like barnacles. A massive head grinned from the prow. It was shaped like the tip of an enormous horned phallic member, bearing the scowled features of some ancient demon. No mistaking was it all. It was a vessel of the slaves of darkness that appeared to be coming for them.
So I guess just a brief. I've just realised we've skipped over a bit here because they've arrived on a planet. Simon is still on the ship, and Two-Face,
he stayed up.
Darkness.
He stayed up on the ship and he's in command now.
When they land on a planet, Janus puts his bloody flag in and for the
Yes.
Well, I mean, Games Workshop is a British company.
Humanity, as Imperium.
I claim this.
This is a British colony.
So
Does that mean there's going to come at some point where people are going to start throwing statues of the Emperor into rivers as a colonizer?
Well, probably not. I feel like it's a propaganda machine as it is in 40k.
I feel like it's way past that. I saw something recently talking about how the entire 40k universe is racist and fascist. So it should be burned alive. That's the whole point. Yeah. So we get a few names / descriptions of some of the Eldar gods, though. I wanted to ask about. So I feel like the Harlequin god, wasn't he? Will be right up your alley.
Well, I mean, God no, I hate
He's
painting
still alive.
checkers.
He's the only one who's still left.
Is it Chegorak? How's that pronounced? Who fucking knows?
It's Eldar Joker.
Eldar
Joker.
Yep.
He literally became the Joker.
Yes, he is the Joker. Hang on, though. Hang on. Let me backtrack a second before we get to all the.
Sorry, go on to the phallic ship, and
we have the phallic ship, which has shown up. Simon is up there in the ship, going, "Oh no." Everybody down below, everybody else is like down on a planet. So Simon goes, "Oh, I need to send a tight beam message so that they will never find out that we have sent the message." They immediately find out that they have sent a message. They detect it. Simon starts trying to play it smart and trick the ship away. Zargan goes, I will leave my least competent crew members in charge of a ship so they don't steal it. And I will go to the planet with the rest. And then goes to a planet.
Can I point out quickly that so Simon is trying to lure him away on purpose, as you said. Simon points out that strategically it makes no sense for their enemy not to take the ship out first and then go back to the planet, since they can't leave the planet without the ship. And he points this out, and then immediately after that, Zargan is just like, to the planet. Just ignores the ship entirely.
Because Zargan does not have an analytical mindset. He has a I want to be the one who gets the prize mindset. Well, he's he's tunnel visioning.
He's begrudgingly actually to go to the planet. He begrudgingly wants to go to the planet just because he thinks that the Harbinger wants him to do that. He thinks like if it went wrong and he wasn't there to try and to do something about it, then
that's true. That's true. There is actually a time pressure to get on the planet.
Well, marginally.
Because by the time so Simon doesn't know this, but Zargan knows that whatever's going down there, his patron ain't happy, and he wants the Emperor's children wants Zargan to intercept it. So he knows that I can go get this ship. I can come back, but at that point, it might be too late to intercept it. That's
true. I just thought it was really funny, like lampshading there from William King. Though he's just like, I'm gonna point out that this makes that the best decision would obviously be to take the ship out, and then I'm gonna do something else because he's a crazy space marine.
But we do have that asymmetrical information.
It's a good use of information like that.
We also have some weird shit going on with Zargan, who's like stroking the head of his favorite pet, a naked redhead named Mara.
And it is also the line that is obviously going to come back later, being stuck on the surface of that tediously dead world, facing the prospect of an eternity of boredom, was not one to please the Chaos Marine. He could think of few less attractive prospects. Oh no, what is going to happen?
Well, I like the fact he also says, if he's there with only 100 of his men, that he'd only have 100 playthings to play with for a while.
Yes.
And then they wouldn't last very long, apparently.
Yeah. So our Emperor's Children and Slaanesh cultist contingent lands on the planet, and Malaris, the pedo priest, goes, I'm a psyker, I'm going to share flesh with a demon to track. And this is when it kind of turns the whole dragon thing on its head, and we get revealed, oh, the Emperor's Children isn't the dragon. He's not the barrier for, like, he's not the hurdle before the boss is faced, because the boss is here in person, just straight up, like, possesses and, like, takes over the body of the priest. Like, oh,
yeah,
okay.
so the Harbinger of Slanesh actually just manifests on this planet.
Out of nowhere. That was a bit out of nowhere that he just showed up
Even
there.
the Emperor's Children were just like, what are you doing here?
Yes.
And then
I didn't expect that.
You also missed that line. The worlds of the Eldar. Nothing quite like them fulfilling you with the urge to destroy something. Makes you feel quite cornate sometimes.
Yes, yeah. That was quite a... Yeah, there's like that. You know what? That actually feels
his dialogue is so. The thing about his dialogue is it's so cliched. It feels like he was trying to write, I don't know, Rictus Erectus from Mad Max 2.
But you know what? I don't mind it. Like, the thing is, this sort of bombastic yet sardonic vibe, I fuck with that for Emperor's Children, right?
You know, that's the weird thing. I think the Emperor's Children, I think Zargon is the best character in this entire book because he's the only one that fits with the way William King is writing the characters.
I mean, again, there's a question I want to ask is, why is it that Ragnar, it's fine, it's pulp, but this just feels flat and trite.
That's what I want to ask you, because I feel like this is just as good as the Ragnar books. In fact, I enjoyed it more than them.
I would argue the Ragnar books are far more enjoyable than far.
I feel like you have poisoned yourself here by, like, comparing the tropes of it to, like... I think you've, like, analysed it on a technical level which is beyond where it deserves to be analysed, because it's supposed to be a chill and easy
read. You can't
read.
analyse it on a technical level.
Oh, you can.
Any of these.
I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying that when you've done that, you haven't, like, considered how enjoyable was it to read. Or, I don't know, but you have said you didn't enjoy reading it. I don't know. I found it more enjoyable than Space Wolf books. So, our big bad is there, and they go down the lift, and they see the Eldar gods, right?
Yeah, so the Eldar gods, I want to talk about these because they were interesting and new and something else as well. And as you said, like, they're probably not going to be existing in the actual lore. So,
well,
I mean, the Harlequin god you said is still there.
Yeah. So Cedric, whatever his name is, Eldar Joker is still there. Yep. There's an entire faction of Eldar built around him, which has sort of existed or not existed or existed as part of other things at various points of the tabletop game rules. But they're basically a bunch of Eldar who hang out in the webway and do silly theatre plays that sort of...
Amazing.
The theatre plays sort of are a manifestation of events that play out, so they all play their part in the events that are happening as dictated by their plays.
You know what? It didn't sound very Eldar until you started talking about them, like, playing parts and, you know...
Yeah, but it's not very...
future telling and shit.
It's not like Craft World Farseer, we need to try and affect the future. It's more interpretive.
History repeats itself?
Well, sometimes, yeah. It's very... That is a theme sometimes, but it's very, interpretive. They interpret events as they happen through a lens of their plays, and they will play their parts. Which is kind of weird and theatrical, and I think it feels like the sort of thing where I expect it to be written awfully, but normally when they've shown up, I've been like, "Oh, this is okay."
Fair enough. I assume the Harlequin isn't a bad god, though.
Generally, I would say if you're looking at, like, how things are narratively framed, I'd say it's a force for good, especially for the Eldar, but mainly just it dicks over chaos a lot. And
that's kind of my. I guess that was kind of my point, though, in that this coming back to what I was saying earlier. It seemed weird that all of the Chaos Gods were, you know, the worst aspects of humanity and the Eldar gods, and the other races.
Eldar gods aren't gods in the same sense that Chaos Gods are.
Where are they then, if they're not in the warp?
They're dead.
Mostly.
Oh,
well,
what?
I mean,
what does that even mean?
They are like, okay.
Slanesh ate them. I mean, when Slanesh... Here's the thing, the Eldar Gods were... do I have to... Okay, I guess I got to do this. The Eldar gods were reflections of the Eldar, warp constructs of reflections of the Eldar. And when Slanesh was born, because Slanesh was a reflection of the whole Eldar race and not certain parts of it, Slanesh ate the other Eldar gods.
So there's...
So they got like sort of drawn into Slanesh, and they don't necessarily exist anymore?
There are a few exceptions. But like I think the Eldar, they were like warp constructs. They weren't like warp entities in the same way that Chaos Gods are. They were like smaller scale, right?
The way you say construct makes me think that they were actually like built on purpose by the Eldar.
I think it's been implied that they were built on purpose by the old ones. I think. I'm a bit fuzzy on this. Please correct me in the YouTube comments.
If you're listening to this as a podcast, then please like and subscribe on our Facebook page.
Facebook.
God, okay. So, but basically part of the Eldar plays, the Harlequin plays actually, relates to the way that the different Eldar gods interacted. So the Eldar have their own sort of mythology of what happened with the gods, including, I think, Cain, the bloody-handed, basically went mad and killed a bunch of them. They were in a bit of a bad state when Slaanesh happened, and there are like 3 exceptions to the all the gods are dead and or eaten by Slaanesh rule. So one of them is the Harlequin god, Eldar Joker. Another one is Cain, who didn't get completely consumed but instead became shattered, which is why you have aspects of Cain, the avatars of Cain that the Eldar can use in battle.
So that's actually mentioned here.
Right?
Yeah, this is mentioned in the...
And the third one would be Isha, who is not eaten by Slaanesh or dead, and is instead locked in Nurgle's garden.
Oh, lovely.
I think Isha's like the maiden of healing or something. And so it's like, hey, I'm going to use you to test diseases.
Nurgle fell in love with Isha, and so it's literally the Joker and Harley Quinn. Isha's the Harley Quinn.
Well, except Isha's an unwilling captive. Isha's not like Stockholm Syndrome. Isha's locked up having diseases inflicted on her. I think she's trapped in Nurgle's garden, I think, right? Anyway.
Has any of this got anything to do with Farseer?
Well,
yes,
we'll get back to
the relevance here is that there is 3 gods described when they go down into the pit. One is the Harlequin god, one is a monstrous woman, and I'm pretty sure that's the only description we get, and the other is half Eldar, half dragon.
Which is Cain?
I don't know what that was. It doesn't say what it is.
Which one was Cain's head?
I assume it wasn't the Harlequin god and it wasn't the monstrous woman, so it probably was the half Eldar, half dragon.
I thought it showed a whole bunch of like masks on the wall, which I thought felt very reminiscent of Harlequins, interestingly.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure those are the 3.
No, but I mean the masks. They described loads of masks, I thought. I thought it described this room as being like covered in masks.
Maybe. I mean, those are the 3 descriptions I got from that section, at least.
One interesting thing here, though, it called Cain the Death God.
Yes.
Whereas I think now, in current canon, Cain is considered the War God.
So Cain is mentioned here, and I wrote this down because it's a name I recognized, and I was really, really hoping we were going to get an avatar of Cain that was going to get one shot by the Harbinger of Slaanesh. Because
you are familiar with this trope. Okay.
Yeah, even I know that as a meme. But it's because Cain is the avatar, or Cain is the death god, as you said here, I realized what they were talking about with the sword. So supposedly the sword is like a shard of Cain somehow compressed into physical, into the physical realm.
So I guess that makes sense. Another thought, I thought there might be something going on with the sword in relation to like the crone swords, but to be honest, I don't think it lines up very well with that. There's like an Eldar prophecy.
I don't think it's got anything to do with it at all.
Yeah, I kind of thought it might at first, but by the end of it, I thought no. I do want to note that the Eldar do also have a 4th god that exists, kind of, which is the Death God that the Ynnari follow, which is kind of being born out of the souls of dead Eldar that did not go to Slaanesh from Infinity Circuits. There's this whole Gathering Storm Ynnari thing that's called sort of creating a new Eldar god. And the idea of this would be that if you die and you follow this god, your soul goes to this god instead of Slaanesh. Pretty good deal.
Sounds like a good deal. Assuming the god is powerful enough to stave off Slaanesh, I'd imagine.
Yeah. Seems to be going okay so far in the new canon, post-Gathering Storm. We'll see where that goes.
Yeah.
Probably going to be a neglected model range. Anyway.
Yeah, they brought back a new Primarch. They're too busy having the second...
We released the 3 models for this, and you can use them from any of the other Eldar. Go have fun. Next.
Now Imperium, it's time for yet more Space Marines, and now he brought the Lion back. Apparently the Lion was not actually in a...
You know what, we'll get back to this weird Lion bullshit at some point. Probably when we look at Dark Angel stuff.
We're gonna, sooner or later, we're gonna have to do a review of the Lion, the Son of the Forest.
Maybe.
Which isn't even out yet at the time of this recording.
Goddamn lion, man. I actually only recently heard that the lion was back.
Well, that was only recent. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How
So
recent?
Cain is a death god, like a month ago, less.
Oh, okay. That explains why I only heard about it like a week ago. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, Cain is a death god. Now would be the war god, and probably stepping on somebody else's toes to call him the death god. They go in, they get the sword as the Emperor's children show up, and the Slaanesh shit shows up.
Yeah. So supposedly, I was. So what is a spirit engine? Why do they keep referring to things? Why do they keep referring to spirit engine?
I think it's a made-up thing for this book.
Spirit engine is a term usually used to refer to like Eldar tanks, Wraith Lords.
So is it just an Eldar power sword or an Eldar machine power source? Sorry, or an Eldar machine of some kind?
It's Eldar machinery that's powered by weird Eldar shit, right?
Okay. Is it powered by Eldar, like souls?
Pass.
Some of them are. I mean, Wraith Lords are controlled by an Eldar soul. Stones put into a walker, and they operate that. Same with Wraithguard.
So it seems like in this case they had to. It was really, really a little bit confusing, but it seemed like when they initially created this sword, during like the fall of the Eldar and the creation of Slaanesh, it seemed like the sword was powered by like a really powerful spirit engine that was beneath the temple. And then when they're trying to get to the sword, the Farseer has to like power up a bunch of spirit engines to open the doors so that he can finally get to the sword. And I wasn't sure exactly what was happening here, whether these were like the spirit engines that they were powering up so that the sword actually had power, or whether the sword
was just opening the door.
But it was literally just like a time pressure thing, so they were like, "Oh no, we're getting chased by the chaos things. Are we going to open the door in time?"
Yeah,
and then they did open the door in time, and there was no issue at all.
Yeah. Well, it was. I guess the time pressure was when is the confrontation going to happen? Will they get to the sword first or not? They do get to the sword first, and then we get a battle.
Yeah.
And this battle is really, really fucking boring.
I disagree. I actually feel the complete opposite. I want to compare this against a few other things, right? We've compared Abnett and Thorpe's battles when it comes to chaos of the fight. So Abnett's battles portray the chaos of the fight really well when you've got things like the arena pit fight in the Eisenhorn, or when you've got like the people in the trenches in Gaunt's Ghosts, like with everything going to hell around them and different characters don't know what's going on.
And they have the complete chaos, and still you know what's happening, right?
You know enough about what's happening to enjoy it. You feel like the chaos is depicted well, rather than it's chaotically depicted, you know? And then you have Gav Thorpe where it's like, okay, well, he's just done balls up actually portraying it to you in the first place, and it's just a mess now, like in terms of visualizing anything. This feels like it's going the exact opposite direction. It's not chaos. This is like a movie scene or something. This is it's like an arranged, choreographed fight for drama. Like the Athenas to Penis steps in to fight Zargan, and you've got like basically every player in this fight is paired off or matched against something in a way that like gives them something to do. And I think it does it in a way which kind of is good for drama. It's drama.
It's a little bit.
It is rote. It feels so obvious, which makes it boring.
I don't know.
It is a little bit. It is a little bit confusing in several aspects. There was one part where the Farseer like charges forward with a death sword, and basically it gets like basically Dark is eventually like kidnapped by a bunch of demonettes and is being like carried across towards the harboring of Slaanesh.
I like that. I liked the depiction of them like very single-mindedly acting as like the extension of Slaanesh. They're there, they grab him, they don't care about his comfort. Cultist guy comes along like, I want to kill him, snip, snap, off goes your head. Doesn't matter how much you believe in Slaanesh, this is an extension of Slaanesh's will that he gets pulled back here.
Yeah, and it was interesting, but like this was the confusing bit for me. Like the Farseer like charges after him, basically gets on top of him with a sword, and then almost in the next paragraph, it describes as like the Farseer and a bunch of the few remaining soldiers from Dark's like brigade. I think there's like half a dozen left at this point, and Athenas. How like they're all suddenly together again, and they're chasing him up the stairs.
Right, they've managed to
tracing
rally
him to-
now because they were dealing with everything else. Everybody's had their job to do, and now they've all managed to do enough of their job that they can rally. Right? That's
Yeah,
my
it was
vibe
just-
I got.
It was just very clunky because it seemed like
And Athenas had been dueling the Emperor's children and managed to defeat them at that point.
Yes, but it felt like the Farseer was basically had caught up with Dark, and then suddenly he like loses all that progress almost immediately, and they're back to like just chasing after him while he gets carried away. And it was very weird. There was just that bit in the middle of that entire scene where like I kind of agree with you in general, is that the chaos was
he catches
very
up and the two demonettes stay behind and fight him while the third one pulls him off, right?
Yes, but then like what I'm saying is like it almost feels like they just got reset. Like narratively, it just like reset to basically what felt like two or three paragraphs before that. It was just a bit strange. I understand what you're saying about the chaos, though. The chaos was like very.
It was very
thematic for the most part.
Yeah, thematic's a good word. Can I also say I really liked the delightfully Slanesh descriptions of the combat from the Emperor's Children from Zargan. You had the delicious shiver of impact, the vibration of blade on bone, making his gauntlets and vambraces flicker, black, red, grey, lime, puce, lilac in eye-blowing succession.
Can we find out that his armor is technicolored and it changes color every time he gets hit?
It's very Slaneshi. He fought nothing like the sensations of battle for clearing the head and driving away ennui. This is what he lived for. And even like Janice is just like, what's the point of it doing that?
It makes no sense at all, but the idea of an Emperor's Children, like Chaos Space Marine, wading through battle
colour.
while he has a kaleidoscope of colour, it's like
so
insane.
gaudy and tacky, you know. But it's
but why not? If you can do it, why not?
I love the description of Zargan in all of this.
He's great. As I said, like he's the only character that feels like he fits the style of the story.
Want a Zargan action figure after the movie?
He's great. I was so happy when
you just make your own Zargan. I mean,
I will.
I'm pretty
Maybe
sure
I will.
He's just that really expensive bloody noise marine model that they made at one point.
But you have to paint him like 50 different colours.
Maybe I should get some more of them and do up my own little Warhammer villains.
Well, I was going to paint up a model of Two-Face McDarkman, but he's just too boring.
I don't know. That could be fun. You do a little gem in his forehead.
So all of this,
give him a big sword.
All of this, and then we also find out during some monologuing by our main villain, the Harbinger of Slanesh, that like there's literally nothing that they can do to I'm going to say his actual name here, which was Sahar Gathon. There's literally nothing they can actually.
Can we point out that the Eldar's name for the warp is just hell?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, that comes up earlier when he's talking to the Farseer. Yeah, but. It just feels like it kind of undermines everything, and it's because I think he's setting up for the trilogy. So many of these characters do things or act in a way or survive when they maybe shouldn't have, simply because I think they were going to come back at some point later on in the trilogy.
Absolutely.
And so at this point, we're finding out we're going into the big battle. We're going to have the death sword wielded by our Farseer. We're going to have Athenas is just beaten the Emperor's children.
Zargan, the Power Rangers villain.
Dark is about to be brought in before the Harbinger, and then suddenly we have this conversation.
So you completely miss the fact that Janus gets captured, and before that he fights some demonettes.
No,
he fights a lot of people.
We covered all that. The demonettes got him.
Yeah, he does fight an awful lot of people, and he's getting.
Have Janus Dark. I know. Now comes the moment of maximum peril. Fuck you.
I want to get a shirt with maximum peril on it.
Yeah, that was the Farseer. That was a quote from the Farseer by our gym master.
So we did miss that.
Yes, it was a quote by Goldmember.
Goldmember.
His name is so fucking generic.
It's just Gold.
Also
Ulrich.
a name
Golden.
the Emperor uses. So I just call him Goldmember.
Yeah, I mean, his name is just
touch, but he touched it too much.
His name is just Ulrich. So yeah, it's just Golden. Fucking Golden boy, Eldar over here, who knew Eldrad and was off on a secret mission.
His helmet looks like it, and he's an Elder helmet. Elder helmets look like dicks, so Goldmember.
Fair enough. I don't know anything about the Elder other than
they have long heads and long helmets as a result.
Oh, I remember what they look like from Dawn of War, but yeah. Fair enough. Anyway, I was going to say it kind of undermines the entire like build up to this fight. I think when your main villain is just like, I mean, even if you use that sword and kill this shard of me, there's plenty of me left in the warp. I'll be fine. I'll come back in a bit. Just seemed a bit lame.
Yeah.
Oh,
I guess
that's the point of demons.
I
Can't
guess-
give a fully kill them.
I
Well,
guess
thought
we'll
maybe,
the warp and they'll come back again.
I thought
guess-
maybe a sword that was a shard of the death god supposedly was maybe going to be a little bit
You mean
different. And that's kind of the point.
the concentrated death force of the universe? Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
oh well, I guess we'll need to come back in a sequel to figure out how to actually do this.
I thought maybe if they used the concentrated death force of the universe on the demon, it might actually die. But then they kind of undermined that entirely because I think it was going into a trilogy.
So yeah, so we have this duel. Well, I found myself thinking here, like, well, if he can't do that, then I guess what happens next, right? And then what happened next? I did find myself thinking, how the fuck is Auric going to get out of this one when the big bad is like just fucking murdering Auric?
But Auric just gets stabbed immediately as soon as the fight starts with a spear.
Just to reiterate what was said earlier, this was possibly a really obvious thing to see coming if you're aware of like the structure of these things, if you caught the reference of Janus, and if you didn't get caught by the red herring of the demon within. But it's also, I think, an easy thing to miss, because it's something which never in a billion years would a Black Library author write this now, which is that...
Because it doesn't... Yes.
Yeah, which is Auric does fucking die, and his soul goes into his spirit stone, which is not the Waystone, as was described to be a spirit stone earlier, but is the fucking dream stone in Janus's forehead.
Embedded into Janus's head.
So he's basically piloting Janus like a fucking Wraith construct, except it's like a gradual my soul seeping in. Janus is slowly becoming the Eldar with his thoughts and his knowledge and the voice in his head that's telling him what to do. And then he's like, oh shit, I'm going to have to let him just take my body, I guess.
Yes.
Which is basically the thought process.
Farseer, just as it will come for your world. God, the dialogue is so cliched. Like,
it's bombastic, but you know what?
At last, a vessel worthy of my power. Now let the Eldar attack us with his puny toy sword.
You know what, though? This is like the same sort of dialogue. I don't understand why you hate this so much here, because it's exactly the same sort of dialogue that Maddox had in the fucking...
yeah, but that thing
World.
is a dumb Space Marine action story.
Yeah.
Trying to be
but like,
deeper than it is. Well,
I don't care. Is this trying to be anything else?
I don't think it is. I don't think this is trying to be anything pretentious either. I think it's supposed to be a light, chill, easy read. It's just a pulpy, like, adventure story. But the other thing I'll say is, I think this sort of attitude works so much better for Slaanesh than for fucking Thousand Sun, you know? And part of that is, like, just how things have lined up over time, I guess. Since he doesn't have any control of the direction 40k took for these different factions. But, like, I don't know. I don't know why your expectations or, like, how this is... I don't know why you seem to think this one needs to punch higher than the Space Wolf books, because I think it's trying to be just...
Especially since... it's also worth considering that this one was decanonized somehow, while the Space Wolf ones had some glaring weird aspects to the lore as well, and yet they're still canon, apparently.
Yeah, but they have Ragnar in them, who's very much still exists, and is a character you can buy and play in 40k.
Oh, okay, that makes all the difference, I see.
Yeah, whereas everything from this...
If they made a model of Auric and sold him, then this book would still be canon.
Just like the Last Chances.
Two-Faced McDarkman.
Just like the Last Chances. Where you still had a model for... except for Cage never got a fucking model.
Everybody hated Cage. Everybody. I will say as well, back to what you were just saying about the twist, wasn't he? Like the final twist where he basically loses his body to the Eldar Farseer in such a weird, like unexpected aspect.
Can I pause there very quickly to say this chapter's title was The Final Betrayal?
Amazing. I was just going to say, like, between the three of us, I feel like we have like three different positions on this twist. And Jimbus is the only one that realized it was coming, because I realized the reference to Janus, the two-faced god, and just never ever expected something like that to happen, because I didn't even realize it was possible within the 40k world, because it seemed crazy.
And it isn't, because this is no longer canon.
maybe
Yeah.
that's
But
a huge part
who
of
would
it.
have thought that would have been? Who would have thought that anyone would dream to have this happen in the canon, right?
Yeah, well, I love the bit where the Harbinger that seemed like just to epitomize the craziness of it, where the Harbinger is just like, oh, you're already claimed as a vessel, and I was just like, what? Are you serious? The Eldar is gonna like just take him over like a demon? Like what? Is that a thing they can do?
Well, here's the thing.
But
It's something that happens more frequently in, say, sword and sorcery fantasy stories. And I've read more than a few of those, so I recognize the tropes, and I'm like, oh, that's what he's doing.
fair enough.
Okay.
Do we have anything else to say about the general plot, or?
Well, okay, so the story uses the sword, banishes the demon. Oh, they don't even use a sword. They unleash psychic bolts at each other like Dragon Ball Z.
Magic missile! Magic missile!
Which is the other thing. I'm like, it
is a very Dragon Ball Z fight.
Very generic in a way. It feels like this could, again, as I said earlier, this story could have been written for Warhammer Fantasy.
It's another.
With no difference.
It's another top 10 anime battles fight. Go on, fight me with your puny sword.
Are you saying the Warhammer Fantasy though is more generic in almost like generally
here's the thing.
than 40k like that?
I'm not saying if Warhammer is more generic. I'm saying that the style of story is generic. That it could fit perfectly well in a science fiction or a fantasy setting with.
Oh, I see.
Relatively minor changes.
No, I totally.
You should say that again in like 5 minutes when we do non-spoiler and talk about.
Well, this non-spoiler thing, I'm going to tell people they should burn their copies.
Well, I'm gonna. Okay, so I want to point out something at the ending of this book.
Go on then.
This has an Abnett ending. It does a little montage.
Oh, there's a wind up.
It does a little montage touching bases with every character. We have
three of them.
The big bad is off somewhere. Oryx's thinking about how am I going to deal with them, and has taken over Janice. We have like a comment about the assassin. We've got to watch out for this assassin, who is presumably. I'm going to assume that the assassin was going to be the one who was. This was mentioned before that they had like a traitor in their ranks feeding back information, and we never got any information about this. So I'm assuming that was just a setup for book 2, and I'm assuming that was the assassin, Steele.
When they're in space, there's like a small narrow beamed communication comes from the dark ship, which is currently piloted by Simon, isn't it? And it's sent to the Emperor's children, telling them that the people are on the planet.
It's sent. No, the narrow beam is sent to Janice.
No,
that was send a narrow beam communication to Janice. Make sure it's narrow beam so nobody gets it. And the Emperor's Children ship guy goes, "We've intercepted a narrow beam transmission."
How do you intercept? That doesn't make sense.
Oh yeah. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure they intercepted it. I thought the traitor was going to come into play there as well. But I thought that then they just intercepted it anyway, so you didn't even need a traitor. That was my interpretation. Which meant then the traitor's just a setup for book 2. That's how I read it. So we know there's a traitor.
I thought the traitor had given them away while they were in the ships, but I don't know. Maybe I just misunderstood that.
Maybe the beam wasn't narrow enough. And the traitor's to blame for that.
That seems really stupid, because Simon even says a line where he explicitly says that they can't communicate with the surface because they'll give their position away.
So just a narrow beam, please. He explicitly says... but he does actually call for, be very careful, we can't give it away. Narrow beam only, so they don't get it.
I've got to look this up. Because that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
why would you explicitly say we're sending a narrow beam so they can't intercept it, and then be like, oh no, they intercepted it?
Yes, right.
Because the plot has to happen.
Yeah.
That's so stupid.
Also, we forgot to mention what actually happened with the ships, which is that the worst fucking pilots imaginable that Zargan left up there so they wouldn't steal his ship, did just have a fucking space battle, just tripping balls up there with no idea how to actually have a space battle. And so lost a battle they should easily have won. Simon just came back and blew up the Emperor's Children ship because it was just piloted by an idiot who's off his head.
Yeah, they are an idiot. I have to say though,
we just cut back to that at the end.
In defense of Zargan, he explicitly points out that everyone is very serious on the bridge when they're actually going into battle. There's no hallucinogenics. The mandatory party or whatever the hell they were doing on there is over. Like, everybody is straight laced when they're actually going into battle. All the fun has been stopped for now.
Except for the ones who are actually down on the planet who have got like stims going, like completely drugged up with combat drugs and.
Oh, only combat drugs though. He also notes that. He explicitly says only combat drugs.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Very responsible.
Very responsible. Yeah. He's still the music. The music is still going on in his head, but other than that, he's being very responsible.
Power chords, epic solo going on as he duels a penis.
So, okay, now I'm going to quote the final line of this story, because Zagan is stuck under rocks, and he's immortal, so he isn't worried, but of course he would need it. He guessed he would have a very long wait until another ship came this way, and his world was so insufferably dull. The music in his head played a despondent chorus and then fell silent.
Oh,
how ironic!
I feel very bad for Zargon. You almost feel bad for this guy. You feel bad for him.
Like, well, I mean, he only turns up in this story as kind of like a plot device, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, no,
he never really gets to do anything himself.
Yeah, because he's being set up to come back in book 2. So our setups for book 2, Oryx inside Janus, and Janus has mentioned, I'll know that in the later on I'll be able to swap back. I've sensed this happens in the future because I'm being taken over by a Farseer. How's that going to happen? The assassin...
Janus explicitly says that I will be back, basically, as he gets sucked into the Waystone.
Yeah.
And it's it feels like the fact that this was going to be a trilogy undermines a lot of this story, because I've said it before, but like nobody can die, nobody can go away, like everyone has to be sort of ambiguous because they're probably going to come back at some point.
You don't know who's like, you say that.
Well, either that or they just disappear.
Well, that could have been ambiguous. That could have been ambiguous, and then they said, "I'll be back."
Well, yeah, that's what I mean.
The trilogy isn't ruining that. The fucking "I'll be back" did.
Well, okay, that was also part of William King's writing too.
Yeah,
I definitely. But like, it's the fact that, like, you know, characters like Weasel, what's her name from the cult, like the Harbinger saying explicitly that I can't die, so you don't have to worry. Like, he didn't have to say that. You're right. There was another one where he didn't have to say that because it would have been ambiguous otherwise, but he makes it explicitly unambiguous.
Yeah,
for no reason at all.
But I guess it does leave me. Do you know what the one thing it does is? It leaves me, now that there isn't book 2 and 3, being a bit like, being more curious. Yeah. Whereas I might not.
Well, it leaves me being like, oh, I'm so fucking glad I don't have to read any more of this shit.
Fuck that. I'd love to read book 2 and 3. Well, you know what? I'll come back to that. So we have that with Janus. How is Janus going to get out of this one? We have the assassin who the Eldar are like, well, we got to keep an eye on him, he's dodgy, which probably means that he's the traitor that was referenced earlier and never fucking did anything.
Wait,
Steel, yeah. They were like, that Steel guy, we got to watch out for him, I don't trust him. The Eldar say something like that at the end.
I'm not sure he's necessarily the traitor.
Well, somebody is. And somebody is, and the Eldar...
He seems very, very loyal to Janus, because he even says at one point...
He also seems very boring for a Slaanesh cultist, if he was one.
Yeah. he hides it all very internally.
Yeah, and
the things he does to their accounts, dude, you have no idea.
Yeah, so we have the Eldar keeping an eye on the assassin, just explicitly mentioning that for some reason right at the end. We have a traitor somewhere in their midst who may be the assassin or may not. You're right, it might not be.
I think the reason that they have to keep an eye on Steel is because Steel was insanely loyal to Janus, and he's probably the most likely to notice that Janus is no longer Janus.
Yep. We have the Emperor's children who left alive. We've had our montage for all of these characters who are going to come back and feature in part 2. Oh no, there is no part 2. I want to say as well, the pacing. You are right, Jimbus, that this followed a 3-act structure really to the letter, and like the pacing of start, middle, end, right, fine, in terms of this story. But in terms of, like, there was something about the pacing outside of that with, like, how the characters interact, which felt premature. Like, it felt like it didn't happen properly. And the fact that it's supposed to be a trilogy makes a lot of sense with that, I think. So, character development felt like it hadn't gotten rolling yet. In the same way that, I guess, we see Ragnar developing in book 2 and 3 of the Space Wolf trilogy, right?
Yeah, I'm going to say it again. I think just so much of the story is ruined by the fact that he was writing for a trilogy. That would never happen.
Well, it isn't. It isn't.
That's the problem. If he's writing for a trilogy that doesn't happen, I mean...
Then we're stuck.
No, it's not... Okay.
I mean, it's not a good standalone, but because Space Wolf works great as a standalone.
That's the thing. if he was planning to write a trilogy, not actually bothering to give any of his characters personality until later in the trilogy was just setting up the trilogy to fail. Because
I don't agree
how
though that they
many
don't have personality.
how many people were so desperate to learn about the continued adventures of Two-Face McDarkman and Goldmember?
Well, it doesn't matter because not enough people bought the book
yeah.
in the first place.
Yeah, I think Dark though was probably the least characterized character in a story.
Which is a problem when he's the fucking protagonist.
I agree.
Got the least
I agree.
character.
I would say Simon
He's
is
not a
maybe
protagonist
characterized
anymore.
less. Well, he isn't. He isn't.
Maybe that's why we replaced him with Auric, because he was a rubbish protagonist.
But then Auric is also Goldmember is also a terrible protagonist.
Well, you know what? I think a lot of what you've said is true, but I think he's still the best personified Farseer in all 40k fiction I've read so far. In spite of agreeing with everything you've said.
And I still think that Gav Thorpe has written far better Farseers.
Well, we'll see when we get to Path of the Eldar, I guess.
Can I ask, like, so what is the deal with... Oh, God. I can't remember what I was going to say now. I literally got halfway through that sentence and it just
airline
disappeared
food?
from my brain. What is the deal with airline food? Yeah. I don't know. The way that the story ends with Janice just, being sucked into a waystone and then just like the promise of I'll be back at some point.
Yes.
Why? This is quite a bold move.
Okay.
Like replacing your main character like this with another character is like a little bit of a.
Well, I guess
it's an unusual narrative choice, I should say. Unless you think that you fleshed out the secondary character enough that you can get away with it.
Well, there's also the side that you haven't replaced your protagonist because he's coming back. He's not gone. I guess you're right. He's been like supplanted at least temporarily. He's in stewardship of the protagonist role.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I think maybe he had to maybe the whole point of him clarifying that he will be back is because he worried that people wouldn't want to read a second book if they thought that he had just been basically removed, right? Because there's a book I read when I was younger, that was a really weird, like post-apocalyptic / fantasy like world. Anyway, you go through the entire plot of the story, and like just before the final act of the story, as it is narratively, the main character basically just like he just gets deleted, like his consciousness is deleted and replaced by another consciousness, and it kind of destroyed the story for me, even though technically it didn't really make that much difference, if that makes sense.
But I guess there's like some stories are stories where you enjoy experiencing the story, and some of them are stories where you enjoy the events unfolding. And if it's the latter, then
it shouldn't matter, right?
Well, if it's the former, it doesn't matter. If it's the former, it doesn't matter because how it's written, how a story is told, is like what you are enjoying, right?
Okay,
whereas if it's the latter, then I already know what's going to happen. Being told what's happening isn't giving me any joy because I know what's going to happen.
That's I guess a good comparison would be imagine we're reading Ragnar's story, right? Because it's from Ragnar's perspective. Ragnar's telling the story. He's telling the story up until like the second book, and in the second book, the demon just like destroys Ragnar's consciousness and then takes it over. And other than that, nothing actually changes in the plot. The demon just pretends to be Ragnar, right?
Okay.
That would be weird, would it not? Even if he never made mention to the fact that he was a demon again, right?
Yeah.
You know it's happened as the reader, and even though the story continues, it's not the same character.
Yeah, it's just a really weird choice, and I guess it would have been a really interesting one. And I guess it then makes sense. Like you get to that end, you're like, oh, now I see why the book is called Farseer, because this is who this trilogy is going to be about. Janice, and I guess he
sets him up to be like this absolute badass, right? Because he's got the wisdom of a Farseer, he's got the powers of a Farseer, but now he's got like
the station
the physical capabilities of, and the sword, and the station, as you said, and like the position in the Imperium of a rogue trader who did all these insane things in the past, and is also one of the most powerful psychers in the entire Imperium.
Yes.
He's basically setting up an absolutely ridiculously powerful anime
character. And he's also in exactly the same position that it was described that, because we didn't go into this, the whole thing with the reason that the demon wanted to take Janus's body was because from Janus's body he could basically start a war between the Imperium and the Eldar and try and wipe out the Eldar, or just lose, like the Imperium might lose.
There were some massive...
Which was really
there were some
stupid
massive
when we've
stakes here.
seen multiple examples of the Imperium having made war on the Eldar and destroyed whole craft worlds.
Sure,
already.
but at the time...
Well, it was kind of weird. They left the threat ambiguous. Like, they kept saying things like, if the Eldar are forced to unleash the weapons,
Basically,
the weapons!
Yeah, basically it was
they could destroy everything.
It was an ambiguous... There's lots of different ways this could pan out, and all of them would be very bad. Yeah.
Yeah, but they kept referring to like these weapons of mass destruction that the Eldar apparently have that they don't want to use, that would destroy like the entire universe or some bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, whatever.
The whole point was they were trying to avoid the Imperium forcing the Eldar to do this. Is what I was saying. Is what I was getting at. And now the
Eldar's in this position of the demon where they have this station and can do all sorts of crazy shit with humanity is an interesting sort of pivot.
Yeah. Someone with the respect quotation marks that Janus Dark has.
Well, they threw it out in favor of just simply having the Eldar waifu shack up with Guilliman.
Yeah, I've heard weird memes about that recently as well. I have no idea what's going on there.
Did I have something else I want to say? I don't think I do. I think does anybody else have anything before we go out? Spoilers to discuss? Wait, you talked about This is the Golden Fleece. Do you want to elaborate on that?
The plot of the story is so generic that it is just taken. It's a very, very basic plot. I mean, the whole quest for the icon,
The Holy Sword, or the Golden Fleece, or
the Golden
whatever
Fleece is one
item.
of the earliest examples of that. But just the quest to go and find the thing is such an old and at this point cliched, overused, and frankly, if it's not got a unique twist to it, it's boring. This story has no unique twist.
I would say that an Eldar fucking wearing WARE, I guess, like fucking taking over the body of a rogue trader is a pretty unique twist. In 40k setting, that is not a thing that happens.
But also,
it never happened. Yeah, and it's especially a weird twist when it's like your setup for book one out of a 3-part trilogy. I'd say it's a unique twist.
I mean,
yeah, the unique twist is so unique.
Why this is now not canon, because basically
it didn't sell.
The main, I mean, he's not just the main cell. I get the impression that the whole central conceit of the story, which is Gold Member taking over Two-Face McDarkman's body, is something that it might have sounded good at the time, but when it came out after that, as the 40k setting was continuing to be written, they were like, "This is stupid.
There's no room for it."
Sense at all.
Yeah, that's fine. That makes sense. I do think though, like the fetch quest, like that is basically Ragnar's Claw as well. I do think that you're...
Ragnar's Claw has they go to multiple places, and it's more interesting than just how
multiple fetch quests. I'm pretty sure you said when we actually talked about Ragnar's Claw that it was basically like the fetch quests from a video game. So don't give me that now.
I think
this thing is more than one. This is just they go to the place and get the thing.
I think
I don't think you can argue that any fetch quest makes a story so generic that it's boring. Like the idea that you have to go and collect something.
Nothing interesting happening during that. As I point out, there's a 7-chapter period where one thing happens of interest, and the other 6 chapters are just boring.
Okay,
boring,
I mean, I still think
the story of Lord of the Rings is basically a reverse fetch quest.
Put it back.
Put that thing back where it came from, or whatever. Also help me.
Put that thing where it came from. Also help me. Put that thing back with me, you guys. Put that thing back where it came from, or I'll poke myself in the eye.
Look, we have a new introduction song.
I fucking Monsters Inc. is a movie. We could have been talking about Monsters Inc. for the last hour.
You know what? I think you are holding this to an unreasonably high standard compared to the Space Wolf books, where you seem to give them a pass for a lot of stuff you do not give us a pass for. But I do understand
I recognize that's because those books I think, did a better job at hiding their influences, whereas this one was so naked. It didn't.
Well,
It was this.
I
This
don't feel
one
like
was.
I don't feel like it's
I
that
mean,
much
he
of a
was
worse story
writing
for it.
Farseer after the Ragnar books. Surely Bill King could have tried to grow as an author. He didn't. He went backwards.
That's fair. I don't know. I still think it's a bit harsh to be like, I like the Space Wolf books, I hate the Last Chances books, and then go, this book is somehow even worse than the Last Chances books, even though it's basically the same.
The Last Chances books, I didn't feel like they wasted my time. This book, I felt like it wasted my time.
I don't feel like the Last Chances books wasted my time. I feel like they actively harmed me for that time spent, rather than wasting it. I enjoyed
You were
this.
psychologically damaged.
But anyway, yeah, I don't know. I still understand. I understand your criticisms, though. It is like, you could make this exact same story and make it not 40k. I get you, and I agree that there's just so much exposition that happens, jumping back and forth all over the place. Which I think, you know what? I think part of that is because it doesn't want to just feel like Janice is the protagonist. Like, I think Simon the Navigator gets as much screen time as Janice does.
Simon is a more interesting character.
Yes, but this isn't the Janice show. It's the Janice and Simon show. You know,
this will be fun when we talk about.
Unlike Ragnar, where Ragnar was the focus.
Because Wolfblade is, I'd argue, an almost perfect 50-50 hybrid between Farseer and the Space Wolf books.
Maybe it's because William King recognized that Ragnar was an interesting enough character that he could carry the entire books and entire trilogy on his own, whereas in the case of this books, he didn't trust Janice, and he probably rightly so, didn't trust Janice Dark to be an interesting enough character that he didn't have to tell the story from other people's perspectives as well.
But also, he knows he cannot have Janice carry the entire trilogy because Janice is getting sapped away into a fucking dreamstone at the end of book 1.
That might be a huge part of it. You might have known that was coming. So, he had to set up the other characters first anyway.
It's not just setting it up, he's making it one where Janice isn't just the clear protagonist. Even though he still feels like it. I think he has failed at that. But that's what it feels like he's doing.
So Oris, or whatever the hell his name is, the Farseer, Auric, he is a it's going to be a meme for this podcast that I never remember anyone's names. It's
going to be a meme for this podcast. I make up fictional fake names for everyone.
That's fair. Auric has he does have a section where it's told from his perspective, but it is a really small section compared to everybody else, including Zargon.
Yeah.
From what I remember, he has like 3 paragraphs or something.
Zargon of a kid.
I almost said that earlier, but didn't. I resisted.
Zargon gets so much screen time.
He does. It's because he's a fantastic character.
I would say it's more than he deserves, but it's because they're setting him up for book 2, and then that didn't happen. I love him. I want him back. I miss him.
Yeah.
Imagine if he returned in, I don't know, one of the Gathering Storm books.
Here I am with my favourite pet, Mara the Redhead.
We need to email.
Imagine if because as we pointed out, fucking the 13th Legion got a 4th book decades later set in the Gathering Storm. Imagine if they made a sequel to Farseer now, and wearing his body, or it goes to find Eldrad, and Eldrad's now the servant of this death god.
Well, they can't. They'd have to recanon it.
ChatGPT, get going.
Write me a sequel. Ask it to write you a sequel to Farseer. Oh no.
I would love it.
Yeah, if a sequel set in the current Gathering Storm thing, it turns out that Auric is actually the reason that the Lions come back.
Oh my god.
Yeah, he goes to Ulfway. We need you to go recover the Primarch, the Lion.
Or maybe it's just, you know what, no, you just tie it into the first one, because Ulfway's in the first Gathering Storm. They show up there after cannibalizing Biel-Tan.
No, Auric secretly infiltrates Ultramar, and he lets them into Guilliman and Sanctum.
No, or he's just there. Or you know what? It could be canon if this wasn't explicitly non-canon. That Auric was one of the Farseers at Ulfway who said, "No, fuck off, Eldrad." In the Gathering Storm event, you go do this on your own.
Imagine if this Farseer in a human body tells Eldrad to fuck off.
Oh, but he's got to cut out that human body at some point.
Also,
Oh, no,
I'd like
don't know how
to,
that's
he
gonna
just means the rest of the thing is imagine them going there, this human wearing like Farseer robes and
So, yes, it is me. I'm back. Don't worry about my skin.
okay, so I just asked ChatGPT if it knew anything about Farseer by William King, and it told me that I was wrong and that Farseer was actually a trilogy written by Robin Hobb, which I have also read.
We
But
could have
apparently,
been talking
It
about
doesn't even know it
Robin Hobb's
exists.
because those are like
it refuses
actually good
to
books.
acknowledge that Farseer exists as a novel.
Truly purged and
Oh, that's the whole
forgotten.
point. I mean, this book, yeah, it is. This is the first entry in the Forgotten and the Purged. And so I'll ask both of you, why was Farseer Forgotten and Purged?
Because they took a different direction to where William King wanted to go, and in doing so, William King's story ended up so egregiously off the rails that they just went, nah.
I'll tell you why.
The way Slanesh was the most egregious canon stuff here is, I want to say number one is how Slanesh was born, and number two was Spirit Stone piloting a human's body as a construct.
Look, I'll tell you the real reason, right? And it's that they tried to create a model of Zargan, but they couldn't create one that didn't look absolutely ridiculous in his multicolored, like, strobe
That's
armor.
bullshit. I want to play with that now.
Can you imagine that?
Let's just do a little
Zargon
villains
and his
of-
technicolored dreamcoat.
I want to do villains of Black Library series. Do a little Mandragore, do a little Zargan, maybe even do a little Maddox. That could be fun.
I've actually, here's the thing, because I know I've spoken to you about, I wanted to do a 30k Thousand Suns force for a very long time. I wanted to do Maddox as one of my squad sergeants.
Oh, that's nice.
That's something, because I read like Farseer.
You
back
need
when
the
I was a
most.
teenager.
You need the most insane Saturday morning cartoon villain dramatic laughing pose for your model.
My plan for him was basically I was going to give him one of those big Egyptian headdresses for his helmet. So just a sergeant with a really, really big hat to differentiate him.
Give him a good.
That would be good enough.
Give him a good pointing hand arm.
Yeah, he's pointing. Have his hand out, have him pointing, and so he's pointing and laughing at the enemy. I should totally do that.
So, what did we think? Jim, do you want to go first?
This book was a complete waste of my time. It is not worth reading. It is not worth wasting your time. Let it sit with... There are piles of copies of Farseer mouldering in rubbish dumps all across the UK. And that is where it belongs.
All right. I mean, I enjoyed the read. I will say this. I found myself at the end thinking, I actually want to know what happens next. But it, like... And it's also, I think,
We'll
interesting.
never know.
We will never know. I think it's interesting as well to see the direction of the canon that King sort of had, and then that obviously did not happen. I think some
What's
very...
interesting is King would come back. I mean, even after... Because the only
Macarian
other
Crusade?
book after this that he... Yeah, Macarian Crusade. He wrote those,
Yeah.
well deep into... It'll be interesting to look at those and see how
Yeah.
he adopted to the change in canon.
Yeah, but in this one, it's interesting to see what didn't make it, I guess. It's like a very different vision of the Eldar in a way.
It's a
But in
vision
other
that's
ways,
very much inspired by the idea that the Eldar are just space elves.
Sure, that's true. But I guess I'll say I agree with that, but I also feel like it's a better depiction of a Farseer than I've seen in most books, even although you disagree with that. I do think it's not really good as a standalone book. I enjoyed reading it, it left me wanting more, but there's never going to be more. So, and it's not really well written as a standalone, in my opinion. It's not like a Space Wolf or an Eisenhorn or a...
This is a book that was not written to be a standalone. It was
It's not a
supposed to be part
first
of a
and only.
trilogy, and of course, because of that, it undercuts itself, and you could argue that's part of the reason why it failed.
Well, I don't know. It failed. It failed because it didn't sell. So maybe something about this book cover with a human with a gem in their forehead didn't work. Because really, like back then, what was your marketing for a book like that? I don't know. But it failed. It failed in sales because of that, and it failed to stay in the canon because what was in it didn't stand the test of time.
Would you have said that at the time it would have been it would have to stand on its own feet more than it would today, for example.
Yes,
like today, a book comes
absolutely.
out and it's like the 40k universe, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's a 40k book. I will buy it to read it."
And it gets
Whereas at
promoted
the time,
in the Warhammer community, and maybe it gets a special edition as well. Who knows? It gets massively promoted on loads of channels and pushed to you, and it's very visible front page of Black Library if you're looking at that. Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like unlike Ragnar as well, and here's probably a huge difference between Ragnar and this book. I think unlike that. With Ragnar, it was a slow build-up, right? So you were introduced to the character. It started in a world that was not that dissimilar from ours, and then we start to introduce a bit of magic. There's a bit of weird stuff, and he sees it from the perspective of somebody from our world seeing magic and weird shit for the first time. And then we get introduced to the 40k world slowly with a very methodical kind of build-up. In this, it's like you are thrown in to the middle, all the terminology, a bunch of the terminology. Some of it is explained, some of it isn't. Like some of it is just completely off the wall. Some of it is weird. Some of it was so weird that they uncanoned it. Like
that's true. Although I don't know how much that stops people from buying the book in the first place.
Well, people recommending it to other people to buy, maybe if they didn't know it's 40k
maybe.
world, right? Because spreading from word of mouth is a huge part of advertising for when books like, I don't know how old this book is. When was this book published?
Around 2002.
So like really early internet kind of times. Like you're talking books are probably spreading by word of mouth and stuff.
And I also feel like there's if you just look at the other books, you look at Gaunt's Ghost, you look at 13th Legion, you look at Space Wolf, I can much more clearly picture a demographic that sees this book and wants to pick it up and read it than I can for Farseer. But saying that, what are your thoughts on the book?
I kind of enjoyed it. I quite liked a few of the characters, mainly Zargan. I'm just going to keep saying that.
Yeah.
I thought it was an interesting read for someone who hadn't really seen much Eldar stuff before. And again, it has some really interesting warp travel descriptions and stuff, and insight into like the Navigator world and that sort of thing, and the families.
Which is all non-canon.
Which is all non-canon now. So I don't know. I don't really care if to be honest, if it's canon or not, because I imagine lots of the aspects of this book will still be canon, and so finding out what is still true and what isn't true is going to be interesting in the future. But I still kind of enjoyed it as a read in the first place. Much
the same as I guess the Space Wolf books. What's still technically fitting as canon doesn't necessarily have much bearing on how good it was as a book.
Yes, and there's definitely stuff in the Space Wolf books that aren't canon. But as you said before, the only reason they haven't decanonized books, books like the Space Wolf books, is because they have Ragnar in them, and they're not going to get rid of Ragnar.
Yeah. Okay. I think that sums up our thoughts. Nice and tidily, the three of us, differing opinions.
It has been fun to talk about a book that most of our audience will never read, probably should never read.
Well, that's your opinion.
And there's going to be more Black Library books like this in the future. I'm legitimately curious. Like, there are others just as forgotten as this, like Gordon Rennie's Gothic War trilogy. That's going to be interesting to talk about.
Well, speaking of other books we're going to read going forward, we've got our next one is maybe a little less forgotten. It is Storm of Iron by Graham McNeill.
This is interesting. We're finally starting with Graham McNeill, a figure who I used to revere, is second only to Abnett, and now my opinion on him has changed considerably. It's true.
Mine has a bit as well.
I considered McNeill the second best Black Library author.
Well, I guess it depends on a lot of. How many were there writing at the time, right? A lot of good authors these days are relatively new. We're still in the early days of Black Library right now. But I'd probably agree with your opinion there, and we can probably expand on that more as we get into Storm of Iron. So, yeah.
I'll catch you in a couple of months. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to us. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and we hope that we'll catch you again if you haven't been turned off already.
It's a sad day when Jimbus is the professional one here.
I've tried to be the professional one this whole damn time.
Well, yeah. Catch you next time.
Yeah. What Jimbus said. See you guys.